It's interesting how people can underestimate the impact of their actions. My name is Ryan, and the best way to describe me is as someone who loves and is generally polite, always striving to give his wife everything she desires. It took me 2 marriages to realize that being reserved and giving your all to the person you love can lead to contempt and disrespect. I won't let that happen again. These entitled women believe they can do something secretly without their partners finding out, thinking that as long as they're not caught, everything's fine. They try to hide their guilt in various ways until they eventually get caught. Then they suddenly feel remorse and explain that they didn't want their spouse to find out and get hurt. Do they even hear themselves talking? What should we think when they claim they never intended for us to discover their actions? It's like they're admitting they did something behind our backs and are only sorry they got caught. That's quite an insult. I'm convinced these women can't grasp normal thinking. Sandy and I met after we both ended dysfunctional relationships. She had spent 3 years with her boyfriend, Billy, who left her for a younger, more attractive girl. Sandy was left heartbroken and with low self-esteem because the man she loved dumped her. She never really got over Billy, and that always bothered me to some extent. I'm Ryan, and I'm 6 years older than Sandy. I was married for 5 years to an incredibly attractive, seductive woman who made my world spin. I was deeply in love with her and expected to spend my life with my ex-wife, Charlotte. However, she had affairs behind my back during a time when I was completely infatuated with her. It took me a year to discover her infidelity, and it hurt me deeply. I left her and swore I'd never allow it to happen again. Afterward, I realized that trust would be an issue for me in any new relationship. Sandy and I were aware of each other's past baggage. I helped Sandy overcome her self-esteem issues as she worked hard to improve her body and appearance. She devoted her free time to shopping for new clothes, spending hours at the beauty salon, and playing tennis. With my support, she transformed into a confident, attractive woman. In return, Sandy, knowing my history, helped me overcome my confidence issues. She always reassured me that I was her one and only love and how fortunate she felt to have found me. Every day, she expressed her love for me and ensured all my desires were fulfilled. Our life was still vibrant, and we were at least 4 times a week. We continued to share kisses and cuddles on the couch, and our love for each other remained strong. We even began discussing the possibility of having children. We truly felt like soulmates. Life seemed great, or at least that's what I believed. A week after celebrating our 6th anniversary, my life took an unexpected turn. I spotted my wife wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, and she looked stunning, which was unusual for a typical late weekday morning. To clarify, I wasn't secretly watching my wife, but we have a home video surveillance system that I occasionally check when I'm feeling bored at work. I find solace in watching our dog Brandy, my little dachshund, especially after enduring my stressful job as a bond broker. However, on that particular morning, when I saw the live video feed, I grew curious. There she was, the love of my life, dressed in a very short, alluring red dress and extremely high heels. Her hair was perfectly done, and her makeup looked flawless. It had been years since I'd seen her look this attractive, and it made me feel uneasy and anxious. So I decided to call my wife and inquire about her plans. I dialed her number on my cell phone. "Hey babe, just sitting here thinking about you. How's your day going? Tennis today?" "Hey honey, I miss you. I don't have anything scheduled for today. No tennis because Kara hurt her ankle, so I've decided to take the day off." "Oh, that's unfortunate. I know how much you enjoy playing tennis. So what's on your agenda then?" "Well, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't made any specific plans. Perhaps I'll head to the gym. Would you be interested in meeting for lunch? I can swing by the house and pick you up." "That's very considerate, babe, but not today. I'm feeling a bit bloated and I'm not particularly hungry right now. I'll simply have a protein shake at the gym. I'll see you tonight. I love you, baby." 2 didn't say my usual, "I love you" when we parted ways, and I'm pretty sure she noticed because I always say it before ending our calls. She lied to me and I need to figure out why she did that. Some things are difficult to handle. Even though I trusted Sandy after all these years, I had a GPS tracker in her car that I rarely used. Initially, I installed it for security purposes, but sadly, I was now using it to spy on my wife. Right after I hung up the phone, I left my office, went to my car, and activated her tracker. She was heading downtown, so I followed her in that direction. My office was close to downtown, and 15 minutes later, I caught up with her. When I saw her entering the parking garage, I parked on the street and waited by the entrance for her to come out. 5 minutes later, my lovely wife, wearing high heels and a dress, was heading towards Fellini's, an upscale restaurant. I stood there, my stomach in knots, hoping I wasn't being deceived by another woman. When I saw her waving to a man in front of the restaurant, I knew I was in trouble. I moved closer, trying to stay out of sight, and witnessed him greet her with a kiss. They exchanged a few words, and he took her hand as they entered the restaurant. I quickly crossed the street and peered through the window. As they stood in front of the hostess, their arms around each other, I noticed Sandy leaning affectionately on his shoulder. Tears welled up in my eyes, but soon, anger overcame me. I wiped my eyes, took out my phone, and started taking some pictures through the window. While I was snapping pictures, I saw him turn to Sandy and kiss her passionately. I captured some photos just as she responded with an equally passionate kiss. The pain in my heart and the anger in my head pushed me down a dark road. I couldn't decide what to do before the hostess showed them to their table. I felt my blood boil when I realized the man was Billy, her ex-boyfriend, the guy who had broken her heart and caused her so much pain. She knew how much I disliked him and that I'd made it clear she should never speak to him again. She clearly didn't respect my wishes. My anger got the better of me when I realized that in just the past hour she had lied to me, dressed provocatively to meet her ex, kissed him passionately, and was spending the whole day with him. That kind of disrespect and humiliation was unacceptable, and I couldn't put up with it any longer. The promise I'd made to myself after my last marriage prevented me from being patient and accepting such disrespect. It was over, and all that was left was to hear more lies and excuses from my soon-to-be ex-wife. Still seething with anger, I drove back to the office and finished the day at my desk, trying to understand how this could have happened again. After wallowing in self-pity for the next 5 hours, I headed home, already planning my next move. I wondered if Sandy would come clean about her day, or if she'd continued to deceive me, which would make my final decision easier. With great effort, I managed to control my anger and drove home to confront the end of my marriage. As I pulled into my driveway, tears welled up as I mourned the loss of the woman I once loved and respected. Sandy was setting the table for a delicious dinner, dressed nicely, and acting affectionate toward me. When I entered the kitchen, she gave me a warm kiss and told me how much she had missed me. It felt like typical behavior of a cheating spouse. I thought she was trying to alleviate her guilt and make amends by showing more affection than she had in the past 6 months. No matter how hard I tried to act normal, it was clear it wasn't working. When she looked at me and asked, "Honey, are you okay? Did anything happen?" I poured myself a generous glass of Mr. Daniels, attempted a smile, and tried to relax as I said, "I'm fine. It's just been a busy day. Let me freshen up for dinner and I'll be down in a bit." In the bedroom, I changed and sat on the bed, sipping my drink and allowing it to calm my nerves. After regaining composure, I went back down to the kitchen and found my beautiful wife in high spirits, with dinner laid out on the table. She seemed content with the day she'd spent with her boyfriend. We sat together, and I initiated a conversation. "This is a lovely dinner, Sandy, and you look stunning today. Thank you." "I love you, honey, and I love cooking for you," she replied with a satisfied smile. We sat in an uncomfortable silence for a few minutes. While eating, I noticed Sandy glancing at me, curious about what was bothering me. Did she feel guilty? Would she finally tell me the truth about her day? I was about to find out in the next few minutes. "So, tell me about your day and what you did," I asked, trying to keep my tone non-threatening. "Well, after you called, I went to the gym for a couple of hours, had a protein bar, and then returned home to prepare dinner for you. It was a pretty uneventful day," she said in response. Seeing my expression and the tears in my eyes, she quickly shifted her gaze down to her plate. In a hushed tone, I asked, "So, Sandy, how do you think we should handle this situation? Should we consult lawyers first, or would you like to try counseling? What are you referring to, dear?" "I'm talking about divorce, obviously," I replied. "Quit playing dumb. What are you talking about?" "I mean the end of our marriage. Divorce, separation, figuring out how to go through with it while still remaining friends." "I don't get it. Why do you want a divorce?" "Seriously? I'll give you a few minutes to ponder that question before I respond." Suddenly, she appeared anxious. Her hands fidgeted with her glass and she avoided making eye contact with me. Several minutes passed in silence. "Were you trailing me tonight?" No, I fibbed, although I knew it didn't really matter. But for some reason, I didn't want her to know. Why are you asking if I followed you? Is there something I should be aware of? I could tell she was still bewildered and didn't know what to say. Typical of cheaters, denying everything. As expected, she asserted that nothing was going on and that she didn't understand what was happening. Why are you bringing up divorce while wearing that sad expression? I stared into her eyes for a while, hoping she'd be honest with me. After a prolonged silence, I said, "Well, let me show you what's been bothering me, Sandy." I unlocked my phone and displayed a picture of her and Billy kissing when they met outside the restaurant. That photo could be interpreted as a friendly greeting. I didn't want to reveal the other pictures until I heard more of her explanations. Her jaw dropped, and tears welled up in her eyes. She began to offer excuses, of course. "Honey, I can explain. It was just a hello kiss. Nothing else occurred. How did you get this photo? So how's Billy these days? Let me explain how I got this picture, sweetheart. I was crossing the street exiting a software store when I thought I saw you walking hand in hand into a restaurant. I crossed the street and approached the window to see you with his arm around you. My initial thought was that it couldn't be you, but I was mistaken. It was you. My second thought was, why is she dressed so provocatively? She never dresses like that for me anymore. Then I realized you were with Billy, and everything became clear. I started taking some pictures just as you leaned in and kissed him. That's how I got this picture." In the next picture I presented to her, she had her arms around his neck, and her short dress was riding up, revealing her backside. "You looked incredibly attractive in that dress, and your hair and makeup were outstanding. Were you going to a modeling shoot or maybe starting a new job as— Can you explain why you dressed that way for him? I can't recall the last time you wore something so alluring for me." She covered her face with her hands and cried, while I continued to gaze at her, waiting for an explanation. When she stayed silent, I went on. "My new S22 phone has an incredible camera with zoom capabilities. Look, let me show you," I said, moving closer to her left arm, wrapped around Billy's neck. I zoomed in on her ring finger, which was now bare of wedding rings, and brought the image up to her face. "No wedding rings today? That's strange. I can't remember you ever taking them off during all the time we've been together. Today must have been a special day. Now do you see why I'm discussing divorce? You lied to me about your day this morning, removed your wedding rings, dressed provocatively to meet your old flame, and lied again about your day just now. You're sitting here lying to my face, telling me you went to the gym today and had nothing for lunch. You put on an outfit for your ex-lover and spent the day with him while I worked to improve our lives. You broke your promise to never see him again. You kissed and flirted with another man in public. You treated me like a fool and just lied repeatedly. I don't know if you slept with him tonight or anything, but honestly, it doesn't even matter. No matter what you say, in my mind, it'll be a lie. But your actions have shown me that you can't keep your promises, and you're willing to lie to cover things up. You tried your best to look appealing for your ex-lover, worked with him, and abandoned our marriage by removing your rings. Then you lied to me over and over. It seems to me that's a valid reason for divorce, and I think you know it." Sandy was deeply shaken. She hadn't truly considered the consequences until now. The way Ryan articulated it made her feel like she had been unfaithful, which had never crossed her mind before. Up until this moment, she had regarded it as harmless teasing and flirting, nothing serious. But for the first time since Billy had approached her, she realized that it had evolved into an emotional connection and could easily be seen as cheating on her husband, if not physically, at least emotionally. She continued to cry and realized that if the roles were reversed, she would react the same way. "What have I done?" she muttered to herself. Her heart ached, and she felt sick to her stomach due to the pain she had caused her husband. She had to get through to Ryan and save their marriage. "Ryan, you have to trust me. Nothing happened. We parted ways after dinner, but you have to believe me. Nothing happened. It was just lunch," she said, sobbing and searching for a way out. "I understand now how it looks. And if the situation were reversed, I'd feel exactly the way you do now. I'm so sorry. Can you please try to forgive my foolishness? It's more than just foolishness. Since you did this with your ex-lover, the one person you vowed to avoid, can you explain why you dressed like that for him without your wedding rings? Can you explain why you held hands and kissed him? Can you explain why you lied repeatedly to my face? Tell me, darling, does our marriage mean nothing to you? And yes, if the roles were reversed, I'm sure you'd feel very differently." Ryan, honey, we can't let our marriage crumble over something like this. Nothing really happened. He was in town, and he invited me to lunch. I know I shouldn't have gone, and I'm aware of your jealousy, but we had a long history together. I thought one lunch after all these years wouldn't be a big deal. I guess I dressed up to show him what he missed. When he left, I kind of wanted to tell him right to his face what he lost, and how happy I was without him. Remembering how he had left me back then still hurt, and I wanted a bit of payback. Yes, I kissed him, but it wasn't a romantic kiss. More like two friends meeting or parting ways. You have to believe me, I want nothing to do with him. Please, baby, let's work this out. I'll do whatever you want. Really, that doesn't mean anything. You'll do anything I ask. Hearing that she had a chance to save the marriage, she smiled, eager to hear what she needed to do, and said, Yes, of course. I'll do whatever you want me to do, baby. All right, Sandy. I'll give you one chance, and just one chance. I have one request. Let me see your cell phone. Why? She looked at me with a puzzled expression. Well, Sandy, if it doesn't mean anything, then show me your cell phone. I want to see if there are any text messages between you two and what you've been saying to each other. No, you don't need to see that, she said, her gaze falling to the floor. She understood that if I read those messages, it would cause me pain and reveal things she'd rather keep hidden. That's exactly what I had in mind. So let's revisit my initial question. How should we handle this? Tears welled up in her eyes as she pleaded for forgiveness, promising never to repeat her actions. It dredged up painful memories of my first marriage. I couldn't believe I was reliving that nightmare. This time, I wasn't going to accept all the lies and let things continue. Wait, please, just wait. Ryan, if I give you the phone, will you promise to give me another chance? You have to know that I love you and I've never cheated on you before. I might have gotten caught up in a foolish online relationship and yes, with my ex-lover, but I was acting foolishly, like a teenage girl. The flirting and compliments were flattering and it boosted my ego. I know how childish that sounds. If I hand you the phone, can you promise to give me another chance? I can't do that, Sandy. But I promise you, if you don't give me the phone, our relationship is over. My next step will be to call Mark Wilson, the attorney I've already spoken to, and have him prepare the divorce papers this week. Can we work on this? I want to be as transparent and open as you are. My issue is that I never want to hurt anyone and will avoid it if possible. Now I see that not being honest is actually worse. Well, honesty and transparency were the only things that could have salvaged this marriage. But you weren't forthright and candid until you had no other choice. The fact that you refused to let me read your text messages until you realized you had no alternative sealed your fate. Tears streamed down her face as she sat there, fully aware of how those messages exposed her dishonesty and lack of trust. She knew I wouldn't accept it, and eventually realized that her emotional relationship with another man was just as damaging as a physical affair. She vowed never to make such a mistake again. Sadly, our once happy marriage came to an end. We signed the divorce papers, and 3 months later, we were officially divorced. We sold the house, divided our assets, and parted as friends. No reconciliation, no vendettas or bitterness. All that remained were the smoldering ruins of a once happy marriage, destroyed by deceit, lies, and a loss of trust. I continued to date, but after being burned twice, marriage was not in my future. Sandy and Billy got together, and 2 months later, Sandy became pregnant. Billy abandoned Sandy as soon as he learned about the pregnancy, instructing her to handle it because he wasn't ready for children. The next day, Billy vanished, leaving Sandy holding the baby. According to her sister Debbie, Sandy was a mere shadow of her former self. Her self-esteem had once again been shattered. Sandy remained in a perpetual state of depression, especially when she lost her baby due to a violent fall down a long flight of stairs in her apartment. Her life had gone from paradise to sheer hell, all because of her vanity and selfishness. She simply couldn't forgive herself for ruining our once happy marriage and losing my love and respect. Trust, loyalty, and respect. You violate one and you lose them all.
Husband's epic revenge on cheating wife and her affair partner after discovering their secret. Most individuals lack a true understanding of how lengthy eternity endures, often conflating it with the idea of infinity. However, my personal experience revealed that eternity spanned precisely 15 years, 2 months, 27 days, and several peculiar hours. It concluded much as it began, with my wife Tracy affectionately locking eyes with her partner and sharing a passionate kiss. Except this time, I was this partner for the first time, and the kiss followed my proposal for her to be mine forever on the night I presented the engagement ring. In a different setting, I found myself a mere bystander in a restaurant 2 towns away from our residence as Tracy and an apparent new lover exchanged adoring glances and leaned in for a passionate kiss. The details of how I ended up in the same restaurant as this couple are irrelevant. Their location, an hour away from our hometown, indicated a deliberate effort to remain discreet. Initially curious, my emotions swiftly shifted from curiosity to shock, disgust, and anger as the scene unfolded before me. I briefly entertained the thought of confronting them physically. However, I was always taught never to smack a woman, so I sat there in complete astonishment since they focused solely on each other. Feeling secure that no one who knew them would see, they leisurely enjoyed their meal, occasionally engaging in a kissing game. I ate slowly, had dessert, and observed them throughout. My emotions fluctuated between rage and helplessness. Upon finishing their meal, they stood up, held hands, and left. Seated there in silent rage, I felt like the most ignorant fool. I had been married to Tracy for over 14 years, with 2 exclusive years preceding that, yet I never suspected she was switching both ways. She never showed interest in another woman, never dropping hints in any conversation we ever had. I erroneously believed I knew her inside and out, anticipating growing old together. The revelation of her switch hitting paled in comparison to the anger I felt at her apparent infidelity. Regardless of the gender of her partner, she had redirected her love, betraying the commitment we made many years ago when she accepted my ring. It signified an enduring eternity, seemingly timeless. Who would have thought that some eternities have an expiration date? Settling the bill, I entered the car and drove home slowly. I had much to contemplate. Tracy did not anticipate my early return after the trip, but fortunately I resolved all issues ahead of schedule. Hence, I headed home on Friday evening instead of Saturday afternoon as initially planned. I had been away since Monday morning, and apart from missing Tracy and the kids, the absence of closeness for more than 3 consecutive days left me with pent-up energy that needed release. At least until I witnessed what unfolded in the restaurant. I was an hour away from our hometown and could have easily driven straight through. However, since I was ahead of schedule, I opted to go out to dinner for a break from driving, and the rest, as they say, is history. Our kids are 12 and 10, old enough to be left alone for the evening if Tracy wanted to go out, which I had no issue with. However, I wondered if they were aware of the situation, since neither had mentioned anything different. Perhaps they were as in the dark as I was, I thought. Regardless, I knew they wouldn't be pleased with what happened next. On the way home, I engaged in the usual self-analysis. What did I do wrong? How long did it last? Etc. At least I didn't have to worry about her lover having a larger manhood than me. Chuckling, I'm talking about myself, gallows humor. I walked in the door at 9 and Tracy still wasn't home. My daughters, Lisa, 12, and Ariel, 10, greeted me happily, but I watched without truly seeing them, nervous and doubtful that I would be home early. The same couldn't be said for Tracy. When Tracy entered about 2 hours later, she must have noticed my car in the garage and freshened up a bit. I observed a shift in her demeanor, appearing less content than in our previous encounters. She inquired about my unexpected presence, expressing concern with her first words. I responded playfully, emphasizing her greeting. Tracy, with a slight twitch in her forehead, mentioned that if she had known I would be home early, she would have prepared a nice dinner. She went on to reveal that she had ordered pizza for the kids, and she and Kate had opted for wine and sandwiches downtown. Tracy, avoiding eye contact, asked if I remembered Kate from my office and if she had mentioned her before. Despite her dishonesty, I replied affirmatively. Tracy then proceeded to sarcastically recall Kate as a blonde with ample chest, remarking on the trail of admirers she left behind. I couldn't help but think that Tracy had the ability to assemble a football team merely by entering a room. This wasn't solely due to her captivating effect on married women. Kate, I used to think to myself, possessed the allure of a goddess with her remarkable chest. She was about 26 years old and had started working at the insurance company where Tracy had worked the previous year. The two became instant friends and apparently somewhere down the line. At 39 years old, Tracy could still turn more than a few heads. She was also blonde, with a beautiful figure and curves in all the right places. She was only 10 lbs heavier than when we first met, but it was still a great package, and at least until recently. It was exclusively my package. Despite the worried expression on her face, Tracy acted calmly. As for me, I could barely stand on my feet, so I just told her that I was tired and was going to bed. She gave me a quick peck on the lips as I walked past her and headed up the stairs. Perhaps I was mistaken, but I was almost sure that I felt the taste of love making games on her lips. I went to bed but did not fall asleep. The kids went to bed before me, so when I heard a quiet conversation a few minutes later, I realized Tracy was talking to Kate on the phone. It was a short conversation, and a few minutes later, I heard Tracy getting into the shower in our master bathroom. Either I scared her so much that she quit the game and wasn't as careful as before, or she thought I was dreaming and wouldn't find out about it. My heart sank even lower. Between kids' stuff and housework, I didn't have to interact with Tracy too much for the rest of the weekend. She wanted to have a family dinner on Saturday night, but I said I wasn't in the mood and just left the room, effectively ending the conversation. She must have known something was up because I'm rarely rude to her. On Monday morning at work, I requested a day off from my boss due to some personal issues I was facing. Having gone through a divorce about 10 years ago and remarried 5 years ago, John, my boss, had some understanding that something was amiss in the Mason family. Considering the success of my sales trip the previous week, he didn't hesitate when I asked for time off. As I prepared to leave his office, he handed me his business card, revealing it to be that of his divorce lawyer. He conveyed his regret, expressing sorrow for the unexpected turn in my relationship with Tracy. I acknowledged his sentiment, stating that I too had envisioned a lasting connection with Tracy. Acting on my boss's suggestion, I sought legal advice 2 days later. Despite my lawyer's potential for a more professional approach, she displayed genuine concern for my emotions and offered gentle guidance. She seemed surprised when I decided against hiring a private investigator to gather concrete evidence of Tracy's infidelity. I detected understanding in her gaze as she pointed out that in a no-fault state, such evidence might not carry much weight. The primary concern, she noted, could revolve around potential challenges with visitation rights, although she expressed confidence that this would likely not be a significant issue. No matter how hard I tried, being around Tracy and the girls at home was something I couldn't handle. Tracy likely sensed this, given our minimal communication. I believe the girls sensed something was amiss by our unusual quietness. I gave Tracy numerous chances to talk, but she never seized the opportunity. The situation escalated when Tracy was served at work the following week. Call it petty if you will, but I wanted Tracy to experience even a fraction of the pain I felt. I presume she was served around 11:03 a.m. because my phone started ringing incessantly at 11:05. I ignored all 15 calls from her and several from unfamiliar numbers, suspecting she might be using friends' phones to contact me. Surprisingly, I felt a surge of energy for the first time since discovering her with Kate. And I was having a surprisingly good day. Tracy's car was already in the garage when I arrived at 5:30. She wasted no time acknowledging her presence, expressing her anger about being served in front of friends and colleagues. I remained silent until entering the house and putting down my things. The girls were in the living room, engrossed in what seemed to be a movie on the big screen. I calmly stated that I wanted to ensure she was served alongside her mistress for her own comfort. Tracy's anger disappeared, replaced by tears. I retorted, questioning her knowledge about Kate and remarking on the lack of caution in their actions. I asked her 2 things: how long and when she had planned to tell me. She responded, admitting it had been about 6 months and insisting they were planning to inform me soon. In less than 30 seconds, Tracy's demeanor shifted from venomous to defeated. She stumbled to the kitchen table and sat down. I walked over to the drinks cabinet, grabbed a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured myself a double, and sat across from her. If looks could homicide, she would have perished within the first 2 seconds. I observed her, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the table. Quietly, I asked how I couldn't have known about her switch hitting after all this time. She responded that she too had only recently discovered it about herself. She insisted it wasn't planned, it just happened. Finally, she looked at me and held my gaze, saying that it shouldn't change anything between us. Tracy expressed her continued love for me and the need to explore this new aspect of herself. She asked for my support and more time to explore, stating that it was her turn. I expressed my shock, questioning whether 6 months was insufficient for her exploration. I mentioned that if she truly loved me, she would remember our vows and not entertain the idea of exploring at all. I shared my belief that fidelity transcended gender, and she shouldn't have considered such actions. She countered by suggesting that true love could forgive a mistake, to which I argued that once could be a mistake, but 6 months indicated a conscious decision. I expressed my frustration, emphasizing that love should not give her the license to tear my heart out and jeopardize our family. I asserted that her actions had nothing to do with gender, labeling herself self-centered. She retorted, insisting that it had a lot to do with girls, and accused me of being a complainer. I confronted her, accusing her of turning into a piece of garbage before my eyes, and challenged her love for me, claiming she now loved me like a pet rather than a man. I accused her of being in love with the other woman, pointing out that I had fallen to second place. When she denied it, I yelled at her to stop, asserting that I knew what I saw and knew her better than anyone else. She looked guilty, and it dawned on her that I had seen them together, despite her quick attempt. To salvage the situation, I argued that it didn't change the fact that she loved someone else instead of me. I expressed the sentiment that everything might have been different if it were another man. At least then I could confront him. She asked if we could be civil, to which I responded uncertainly, acknowledging the painful truth that she had fallen in love with a woman who had become her mistress, ultimately stealing my wife. A few months later, I learned that the children knew nothing about Tracy's affair. They thought that Aunt Kate was just a close friend of Mom's. They had both seen the occasional quick kiss and gentle touch, but since Aunt Kate wasn't a man, they didn't think there was anything inappropriate. I found out about this one night when the kids and I went out to dinner, and the kids mentioned that Kate had been spending more time in the house since I moved out. They seemed to have figured out that Aunt Kate was one of the reasons Tracy and I were getting a divorce. Since we live in a no-fault divorce state, our finances were pretty much split down the middle. I had to pay her child support, she got the house until the kids went to college, and, of course, I had to pay child support. I moved into an apartment about 15 minutes from my old home. I was completely crushed. Tracy and I kept in touch through the girls. They were involved in all sorts of activities, both in and out of school, and Tracy and I tried our best to show them that we were going to support them as much as possible. I don't know why, but Tracy fought hard with the divorce, and it dragged on for a year before we finally did it. I was polite, nothing more, when I ran into Tracy and Kate at my daughter's parties. As for family events, I was always invited, but knowing that Tracy would be there, I apologized and escaped. For forgiveness, I know I was giving up some wonderful family memories, but it took everything I had to keep my composure when she and Kate were around. I did a solo day for the kids to give them birthday and Christmas gifts. As you might expect, each of us retained the friends we had before we got married. Almost all the friends we made after we got married stayed with Tracy. As one of the husbands explained to me, many of them felt awkward around me, given that I had lost my wife to a woman. The consensus seemed to be that I somehow deserved it, and several of our married women friends almost made just that claim. I let them go without a fight because, as the old saying goes, you learn who your real friends are under adverse conditions. By my own choice, I didn't date much for the next few years. My heart certainly wasn't ready for this, and I didn't need much communication. After a year of being alone, I went to the local animal shelter and adopted a German Shepherd who was probably about 3 years old. I actually went to the shelter and asked them to show me the 3 dogs that had been there the longest. The one I chose had been there since he was a frisky puppy, but after being rejected repeatedly, he turned into a quiet, reclusive animal with the saddest pair of eyes I've ever seen on an animal. I felt like we were soulmates because we were both rejected. The dog's name was Bob, not some cute animal name or something named after a cute Disney character, just Bob. Bob caught me, and I caught Bob. The first thing he did when I brought him into my apartment, after sniffing around, was to climb onto the couch next to me and curl up next to me. He was good with the girls when I had them over on the weekends, but I think Bob liked it best when it was just us guys. He loved to walk or ride with me, and we could talk about almost any topic. Admittedly, Bob was mostly silent during these conversations, but I knew from the look on his face and ears that he was paying attention to everything I said. A few years later, my oldest daughter, Lisa, met a guy from Boston in college and got married. Since I was doing pretty well in my engineering career, I could afford to give her the wedding of her dreams. I couldn't have been more proud of her as I walked her down the aisle, but after the service, I earned a reprimand from her for ruining my one line. I realized this right during the rehearsal, but under the pressure of the real situation, my voice cracked. Coming to my senses, I responded to the question of who was giving Lisa away with a simple I instead of the correct her mother and I. I admitted to almost choking on my words. Taking my seat in the front row beside Tracy, she leaned towards me and quietly remarked that it was disgusting, and I knew it. Kate, seated next to Tracy, leaned forward and audaciously glared at me. I discreetly told her to forget it with just my lips, checking if the pastor noticed our exchange. Wedding ceremonies always bring back memories for me, and at first I looked back on my wedding day fondly. This memory lasted about 30 seconds before I mentally pictured Tracy and Kate together in the restaurant when I found out about them. When I awoke from my reverie, Tracy was looking at me sadly. She blushed and quickly looked away. I guess I wasn't the only one taking a walk down memory lane. Although I didn't try to watch, I noticed that Tracy and Kate seemed to be having a great time together with Lisa, her new husband Jerry, and almost everyone else. It was then that I noticed I was one of the few single people over 50 in the room. Feeling sorry for myself, I went to the open bar and ordered a shot of 18-year-old Irish whiskey. Taking my glass, I sat down at my table and quietly patted myself on the back for hosting such a grand event. 3 years later, I was about to play the father of the bride again when my youngest, Ariel, had her beau walk her down the aisle. This time, I decided not to go it alone and finally made a concerted effort to meet people. Returning home from a 3-day trip out of state. 3 weeks later, I stopped at a small bar restaurant about an hour from my apartment. Though I usually avoid such bars due to my dislike of country western music, they were advertising pork barbecue, so I had to stop. The food was great, and as the DJ started playing music around 8 p.m., I looked around in case there might be someone worth chatting with, so to speak. Just then, a 30-year-old black woman with the face of an angel walked through the door. She was absolutely gorgeous, and I wondered why an unmarried young black woman was at the bar at this time. On the other hand, there I was, the lonely old white guy. I knew she was probably too young for me, but damn it, I motioned to the bartender to put everything she drank on my tab. He told her that her drink was paid for and gestured in my direction. She walked over to my table to thank me, and I invited her to sit down. To my surprise, she sat down next to me and introduced herself as Jade. During a pleasant evening, she suggested going to her place, catching me off guard. Without hesitation, we headed towards the door, when a man in a cowboy hat approached Jade and lightly kissed her cheek. I halted abruptly, and Jade reassured me, introducing him as her husband, Fred. She asked if he could join and have a look, to which Fred grinned and mentioned their involvement. I expressed my discomfort, stating there was something wrong with the situation and the messed-up generation. I raised my hands, signaling them to stop, and left alone to my car. In another attempt to find companionship, I turned to my church. Carrie, a 50-year-old divorcee with long black hair, a 34 billions chest, long legs, and a big smile, and I got along well. After a few dates, we went back to my apartment, leading to closeness. However, during the encounter, she began muttering her ex-husband Jim's name. The situation escalated as she screamed it during subsequent climaxes. I stopped immediately, explaining that I wasn't Jim. In response, she expressed genuine anger and questioned why I had stopped. In silence, I drove her home, and needless to say, there was no fifth date. For my next dating venture, I invited a CO worker over for an evening of food and dancing. Allison Webb, a vivacious 42-year-old divorcee who had separated from her husband almost 5 years ago, was a blonde with a slightly larger chest and a bump than someone of average proportions. We had been friends at work for about 10 years, and by this point, she had heard my sad story, and I had heard hers. Our great evening turned into several wonderful evenings, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company, even before our first time making love. Looking forward to a great time at the wedding, I invited Allison to be my date. She responded seriously, expressing uncertainty about accompanying me to my daughter's wedding considering the family dynamics with my ex-wife. I mentioned that she would need the green light from Bob, my wingman, a 45 lb German Shepherd mix with sophisticated taste. I explained that if Bob didn't like her, he wouldn't accompany me to the wedding. She found this peculiar and labeled me a strange person. After passing Bob's test the following week, Allison agreed to be my wedding date, bringing joy to the girls who were happy I wouldn't be attending solo. Tracy, however, appeared displeased with this arrangement, consistently giving me disgruntled looks. Since I didn't engage much with her, I disregarded her opinion. However, it bothered Allison, who sensed Tracy's dislike for her. At the rehearsal dinner, I found Tracy alone and finally confronted her, asking about her problem. Tracy responded with sarcasm, expressing disdain for Allison and questioning if I was now dating Girl Scouts. I noted that Tracy's jealousy didn't look good on her, reminding her that Allison, Tracy, and Kate were the same age. I playfully remarked that Tracy had traded me for a younger female version, and she responded with shy grace. A year later, Allison became my second wife, and life went on. Truthfully, I had completely forgotten that I was on the bone marrow registry when I got a call one day at work and was told that, after 30 years, I was a match for someone. Thrilled at the opportunity to help save someone's life, I knew the bone marrow extraction would be somewhat inconvenient, but my hero complex made me more than willing to undergo the procedure. Further testing was required, and if it was favorable, the extraction would be scheduled for 2 weeks. After granting my consent, I told them I was on board. While not very religious, I believe in God, and there's an old saying that God works in mysterious ways. I never thought about it until 4 days later, when I spoke on the phone with my oldest daughter, Lisa, during our weekly conversation. Ariel and I avoid discussing Tracy's life, but Lisa mentioned that bone marrow had been found for Aunt Kate, and they were actively involved. Through Lisa, I conveyed my best wishes to Kate and Tracy, expressing that despite the pain caused by their actions, I didn't wish them harm. Lisa warned that as an adult, I could call them myself. I acknowledged this but explained that the less I talked to them, the less likely I was to say something unpleasant that I might regret later. Lisa encouraged me to come to terms with the divorce, highlighting that I've been happily married to Allison for almost 2 years. Acknowledging my happiness, I shared that while I no longer hated Tracy, she wasn't on my Facebook friends list. I decided to send Tracy flowers with a card of good wishes. Later, as I ordered the bouquet, a thought struck me. Bone marrow matches are rare, and the coincidence of Kate finding a match around the same time as me seemed too convenient. Aware of the anonymity in the donation process, I contacted my registry contact, pretending to be optimistic, and inquired about the likelihood of my match living in the same city. She stuttered and admitted it was the first time someone had identified their match. Frustrated, I realized I was going to donate bone marrow to Kate. Angered by the situation, I reflected on how she stole my wife, never apologized, and now expected me to save her life through a bone marrow donation. I determined it wouldn't happen. 2 days later, I called my registry contact back and said I was refusing to make the donation. She almost burst into tears, and when she came to her senses, she asked me if there was any specific reason why I backed down. She explained that although I had the right to refuse, this was almost never done and would cause great consternation at the registry. I apologized for causing horror, but told her it was in my own best interest to refuse. She muttered that she was sorry and told me that if I changed my mind in the very near future, I should call her. Allison was furious when I told her I had turned down the donation. I didn't tell her that I found out who the donation was supposed to go to. She just knew that I had abandoned the obligation to possibly save someone's life. My wife expressed her frustration, practically screaming at me, questioning why, after expressing the desire to help, I now wanted to ruin someone's life. It was the first time I heard Allison use strong language, and I decided to be honest with her, explaining that I wouldn't have informed my ex-wife or Kate about the donation if I had a choice. She was unimpressed by my reasoning, accusing me of denying Kate a chance at life for revenge. I clarified that it wasn't revenge, emphasizing my efforts to have as little in common with my ex-wife and Kate as possible since they both hurt me. Allison questioned if they knew about her involvement, and I assured her that everything was done anonymously and I only found out about it by luck. As I shared this, Allison's expression softened. She argued that I couldn't refuse the opportunity to save someone's life, emphasizing the weight of holding Kate's life in my hands. She whispered that I was too nice a guy to withhold help, and that the guilt would eventually consume me. I disagreed, stating that I wouldn't feel guilty as Kate and Tracy had broken my heart. I emphasized that they would never know it was me. Allison expressed concern, mentioning the hope they had and how my decision might have ruined it for them. Allison and I continued to have disagreements, and it felt like we were growing apart as a couple. Our differences seemed more pronounced than ever. At one point, she asked about my Christian charity, to which I responded by questioning whether I should blindly give money to someone who might damage me. She called me ridiculous. In response, I explained that they hadn't torn out my heart and turned my world upside down like they did to me. I expressed my reluctance to simply shrug off the pain and help them after 17 years. I reminded her that Tracy had been married to Kate longer than to me and suggested she deal with it. Allison insisted they had made a decision, and I replied quietly that they could live or not, indifferent to their fate. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I left the room, informing Allison that I was going to the range to blow off some steam. She reminded me to be back before dinner, as the girls were coming and didn't want me to smell like gunpowder, instructing me to take a shower before we ate. I knocked the living crap out of the target with 500 rounds from my 9mm. I can't explain why, but shooting always relaxes me. I think it's because you have to really concentrate on what you're doing, and when you stop concentrating so hard, your body goes into a relaxed mode, at least that's my thought, and I stand by it. I definitely smelled like gunpowder when I got home. So when I got home, I quickly headed to the shower. I glanced at the dining table. It was set for 6 people, and from the smell, Allison was cooking a roast. She is a great cook, and I was hoping she would make these little brown potatoes instead of mashed potatoes. After taking a shower, I poured myself a glass of rye whiskey and brought Ellie a glass of wine. She seemed a little nervous, which I put down to her wanting the dinner to be perfect for the girls and their husbands. I kissed her on the lips. I was sitting in the living room reading on the computer when the door opened, and the girls came in, not accompanied by their husbands but by Tracy and a shabby-looking Kate. I wasn't happy to see any of them, and I shot Allison a glare as I stood up to greet everyone. I kissed both girls but didn't say anything to my ex or Kate. I noticed that they greeted Allison with what could be called enthusiasm. There seemed to be a lot of whispering around. Not having been born yesterday, I immediately knew that Allison had orchestrated this little intervention. I was more inclined to think of it as an ambush, since apparently I was the only one unaware of the meeting. I thought about just taking my phone and leaving, but then I decided it was time for me to speak up. At first, however, I had to endure the excuse that it was just a nice meal with family and friends. Kate's illness was the main topic of conversation at the table, although I took no part in it, sitting with what I thought was a thoughtful expression on my face. I suppose dinner and dessert were good. I really couldn't tell. Being the good host, I provided everyone with their after-dinner drinks, and we moved into the living room. After a moment of silence, I decided it was time to express my thoughts. I questioned who would speak first. The woman who had betrayed my trust to arrange the meeting. The woman who had broken my heart years ago but now believed I owed her a favor. Or perhaps the woman who had taken a married woman from her unsuspecting, loving husband and now needed help for a chance at life. As I made my statement, I looked at each face in turn, and none of the women could meet my gaze. Allison seemed excited when I called her name, and my eldest daughter, Lisa, took the initiative to speak. She acknowledged my lingering anger toward Mom and Aunt Kate but criticized my refusal to donate bone marrow as childish and petty, stating it was beneath me. Lisa argued that seeking revenge by denying someone a chance at life was wrong, emphasizing that it involved a person's life, not a frivolous act like hitting someone with a whipped cake. I took a sip of rye whiskey and cleared my throat, shaking my head slightly. I expressed my anger and stated that every action in life has consequences. I noted that Tracy and Kate never expected such severe consequences but were now trying to make their problem mine. I highlighted the unexpected opportunity to make a difference in the life of someone who had wronged me. Despite their belief that it was driven by revenge, I suggested it might also be a way for me to regain some self-respect. After all, how much self-respect could I have if I helped the woman who stole my wife survive? And I don't think any of you even considered the fact that you think I should be easier on Kate because she's a woman. If her name was Carl and he was a 200 lb man, most of you would probably think that I would be right about what I do. But it doesn't matter to me that Kate is a woman. She's a wife-stealing cow. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Kate attempted to convey her feelings by staring intensely at the carpet. Seated beside her on the couch, Tracy reached over and gently squeezed Kate's hand. I asserted that my decision was not driven by revenge but by hatred toward Kate. I expressed that I despised her, harboring no intention of assisting her in any situation. I highlighted my minimal communication with her during the 17 years she was with Tracy. Tracy sniffled, holding back tears, and questioned whether I hated her to the extent that I would deprive someone else of a chance to live. She appealed to my past love for her, suggesting that considering it a noble thing to do would be a matter of honor. I retorted, expressing skepticism about Tracy's notion of honor, calling her a fancy woman and stating that she had no right to lecture me on what honor is. My volume rose, and I tried my best not to tell them all, including Allison, to burn in hell and leave me alone. I took a couple of deep breaths, and Allison apparently decided that I wasn't angry enough with her. She quietly told me that I'm a good person and always do the right thing, emphasizing that retreating was wrong and that I would never be able to live with myself if I did that. Lisa interjected, reminding me that I taught Ariel and her to always do the right thing, even if it seemed wrong. Acknowledging this, I asserted that my decision was for me to avoid any regrets or loss of sleep. Kate suddenly exclaimed, pleading with me not to let her die. Despite acknowledging the offense I felt, she appealed to the grim reality of her situation, mentioning the slim chances of survival unless I donated my bone marrow. Kate's eyes looked haunted. Asking me to help save her life must have been the hardest thing she's ever done. I looked deep into those haunted eyes. I did not feel the joy of confirming my decision, but I confirmed it. No, that's all I said. I didn't say the phrase "I'm sorry" because frankly, I wasn't sorry. I won't do anything in my power to help this woman. Kate took my answer better than Tracy, who burst into tears. Allison walked over to the couple to calm them down, and I heard her whisper, "I'll try. I'll talk to him." She was so caught up in the moment that Allison never realized that she had put our marriage in jeopardy. I will have to think long and hard about whether I can bridge the gap in our trust. I grabbed the car keys from the key ring where they were located. I walked out the door while 5 women cried. I didn't return for 3 days. I didn't answer any of the dozens of phone calls from Allison or the kids. The house was dark. I quickly looked around and decided that Allison had stopped somewhere else for the time being. A suitcase and some clothes were missing, but almost everything else was left untouched. I also grabbed my suitcase and packed a few things, taking most of my clothes and most of my belongings with me. I left my wedding ring in the middle of the kitchen table. 3 days later at work, I received an anonymous call that turned out to be Allison. She expressed disbelief that our relationship was ending because I refused to be what she considered the biggest idiot in the world. I responded by expressing my astonishment at being married to someone who had completely violated my trust. I suggested that both of us could fix the situation, and if anyone was seeking revenge, it wasn't me but perhaps a higher power. I referenced the biblical saying, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord." I criticized her for her actions and remarked that she really sucked. Kate passed away 2 months after our official divorce, and I learned about it through the local newspaper obituary. I hadn't followed her case, and none of my daughters kept me informed. Despite the estrangement from my daughters after the confrontation, I stood firm in my belief and stance of not helping Kate, and neither I nor my girls backed down. My decision was the right one for me. I never lost a minute of sleep over not giving Kate my bone marrow. The people at the bone marrow registry were not very understanding of my individual situation and completely crossed me off the list. I was fine with this because the likelihood of me getting a second match was extremely unlikely. Bob was a bit moody and not exactly thrilled with any of the women I'd brought home over the past year or so. But that was okay because at 62 I wasn't really looking. For wife number 3, somewhat surprisingly, I was still getting my share of good closeness. I learned that at that age, eligible women outnumbered eligible men about 4 to 1, and if her health was good, there was a good chance my girlfriend was ready for a roll in the hay for the evening. Of course, we couldn't frolic with too much youth. After all, neither of us wanted to break a hip. But more often than not, we both enjoyed a nice roll in the hay. I jokingly called my ladies my handsome old singletons. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for over 4 years when my youngest, Ariel, called to tell me that Tracy had died a few days ago. She thought I should know and invited me to the funeral. We had 15 good years together and had 2 kids, so I figured I should at least show up. Maybe I could improve my relationship with the girls. I sat in the back, alone. It was a good ceremony. After the funeral, I approached the girls and their families. I received shy hugs from the girls, firm handshakes from their husbands, and shy greetings from my 3 grandchildren. We went to a nearby restaurant to talk. About 3 minutes passed before the first salvo was fired. This came from Lisa. She abruptly questioned why Aunt Kate was allowed to die, and I responded, noting the unchanged nature of the conversation after 4 years. Referring to Kate as a wife thief, I asserted that it would be the final discussion on the matter. Changing the topic, I pointed out a young man at the bar, suggesting a hypothetical scenario where he kissed Lisa. Jerry expressed, without hesitation, that he would damage him, and when asked about a potential affair, he stated the man would already be dead. I drew a parallel, mentioning that since he would be dead, Jerry wouldn't have to worry about donating bone marrow if he fell sick. Jerry agreed, and I clarified that I didn't save Kate's life partly due to her being a woman, which may have been a mistake. I asserted that I shouldn't have saved the life of the man involved with my wife, or the one who stole it. Jerry agreed with the realization dawning on him, and he looked around the room, observing understanding gradually light up in each pair of eyes. I quietly shared that I wasn't proud of my decision, but not ashamed either, explaining that Kate didn't deserve my compassion for stealing the love of my life. Ariel questioned how I could withhold compassion if I ever loved her mother. I confessed to having loved her mother deeply, but when she broke my heart, much of that love turned to hate. Acknowledging that I was just a man, not the monster portrayed by her mother, I expressed that things didn't turn out well for her mother and that karma eventually caught up with her and her friend. Tears filled the eyes of the other 4 adults in the room, while the children looked confused and worried. I recognized that it would take time for all of us to come to terms with the situation and suggested that we not dwell on the past as life goes on.
I go by the name Ruby, a 26-year-old single woman without a full-time job. Since my middle school years, I've tended to keep to myself quite a bit. I went to high school, but I dropped out, so I only have a middle school education. Since then, I've been living with my parents, working part-time jobs, and taking on work from online postings. I have an older brother named James, who's 3 years older than me, and he's the complete opposite of me, good at sports, lots of friends, and the so-called outgoing type. My brother didn't want people to know he had a sister like me. He never brought friends home, and even if I happened to run into him and his friends at the convenience store, he'd ignore me. I thought it couldn't be helped and considered it like someone else's problem. Once my brother started college and moved out to live on his own, I stopped worrying about such things. Then there was talk of my brother getting married. He would be turning 29. It wasn't surprising. Later, it was decided that my brother would bring his fiancée to our parents' house. Since I was home that day, I decided to join them. "Dad, Mom, I'm home," I announced as my brother arrived on time. When he saw me sitting with our parents, he looked confused for a moment. "Sorry to intrude," his fiancée entered the house, seemingly unaware of my brother's attitude. Then, looking at me, she said, "Huh," and looked puzzled. I could tell from her eyes that she was asking my brother, "Who is this?" He probably hadn't told her about me. "Thank you for coming all this way, I'm James's mother. This is his father." My mother introduced only herself and my father. The fiancé seemed satisfied and bowed politely but still looked puzzled. My father didn't follow up on my behalf. My parents have always been harsh with me, who couldn't live up to my accomplished brother. When we were young, they'd say things like, "Your brother can do it, why can't you?" as if it was part of our education. But it changed as we grew older. Eventually, I was even called a money-sucking leech. It seemed that my parents were planning to ignore me at this meeting too. "I'll go and get some more drinks." As my mother stood up to leave, she whispered in my ear, "Why are you here? Go back to your room." I had attended this meeting because I wanted to get along with my family in my own way, but it seemed to have backfired. Still, I couldn't just leave, so I stayed put. My brother's fiancée introduced herself as Emma. She was the same age as me, 26, but a beautiful woman with a refined atmosphere, giving off a vibe that I shouldn't casually talk to her. My brother seemed a bit annoyed. He probably didn't like me being there. He introduced the woman to our father and mother, but he didn't talk to me at all. It felt like a ghost. When the conversation about the marriage was over, casual chatter naturally started. But my brother still acted like I didn't exist. Then James asked, "What do you usually do, Ruby?" Before I could answer, my brother interrupted, "Wait, Emma, you don't need to talk to her," that's what he said. Clearly, Emma looked a bit surprised. "That's right, don't worry about it," my mother chimed in. "Yeah, don't worry about it. She's just a stranger with a blood relation." When my father said that, something inside me ended. A stranger, huh? I thought so. Reconciliation was impossible from the start. That's how the meeting ended, as if it didn't matter whether I was there or not. Soon after, my brother and Emma got married and started building a house to live in together. My brother works at a famous company after graduating from college. He's still in his 20s, but his income seems good. Emma is going to be a stay-at-home wife and has already quit her job. Around the time my brother's house was completed, we received an invitation to a housewarming party. It would be held with a limited number of guests, including Emma's relatives and my brother's bosses. My mother was anxious, saying, "Oh, it's already finished. Time flies. We need to prepare a housewarming gift. What should we get?" My father said, "We're family, so it doesn't have to be anything fancy," and he casually turned over the invitation. Only my father and mother's names were on the invitation. My name wasn't there. My mother seemed to have noticed but asked, "Ruby is coming too, right?" I wondered what she meant. At the meeting, they had introduced me in such a horrible way. "It's fine if I'm not invited," I declined, but my mother insisted, "No, you're coming. I'll make arrangements." So, I ended up going to the party. On the day of the party, it suddenly started raining. My parents and I took a taxi to my brother's house. My brother and his wife didn't come out to the front yard because of the rain and welcomed their guests at the entrance. As soon as we arrived at my brother's house, my mother said to me, "You pay for the taxi," and got out of the car with my father first. Without umbrellas, they both hurried toward the entrance. So that's why, I thought. There was quite a distance between my brother's house and ours. I thought it was extravagant to take a taxi. I was the one called to pay for the car. After I paid, I ran towards the entrance, and Emma asked me, "Who are you?" I had only met Emma once before. Maybe she forgot me. I thought so and introduced myself. "I'm Ruby, James's sister," but she said with a smile, the high school dropout. Neat. We didn't invite the parasite living off a parent. Emma said this casually with a smile. My brother, who had just returned from showing someone in, came out too. He said to me with disdain, why are you here?" "Hey James, I told you not to invite her." "Why is she here?" "Well, I don't know either. My brother didn't want to invite me, after all." And Emma changed her attitude once she knew about me. Actually, she's worse than my brother and parents. Would it have been better if I didn't come? I asked my brother cautiously. "Yeah, you're a stranger because of your low education." Actually, not finishing high school doesn't even count as an education, right? "Could you please leave the property quickly?" Emma followed up on what my brother said, like she was siding with him. Her expression, remaining calm the whole time, was truly terrifying. Understood, I turned on my heel. The taxi from earlier was gone, and since we weren't on a main street, it seemed difficult to find another one. I didn't have an umbrella. I trudged along, getting drenched in the rain. I could hear Emma's laughter from behind. After a while, I returned home. My parents came back looking like they had a good time. They saw my face and asked, "Why did you leave suddenly? Couldn't even call a taxi for the way back." "You're so useless," my mother complained, as if it were a matter of course. "Sorry, I suddenly had a stomachache," I lied to cover it up. "For such a reason you left on your own, you're hopeless. Make sure to give the gift later." "You're an adult," my father told me, speaking of which, I had prepared something to give at the party, but I brought it back without giving it. I wanted to send it by mail, but I didn't know the address. I could ask my parents, but the atmosphere was awkward, so I decided to contact my brother. "I want to send a gift, can you tell me the address?" This was the only reply from my brother. "I don't give my address to strangers, right?" I let out a sigh. Is it really fun to start dominance over me in private? Not just embarrassing to introduce to others, I couldn't help but be amazed. It might not be just my brother who's sending these messages, maybe Emma is also typing and laughing out loud. Either way, it's ridiculous. I gave up on sending a congratulatory gift with the meaning of my brother and his wife in their housewarming party. I decided to leave home. I realized I couldn't get along with my family anymore and decided to live on my own. I didn't have a full-time job, but I had some savings from my part-time work. I was able to rent a room for living alone. Since it wasn't much to live on, I decided to try streaming videos in my spare time. I was already interested in watching streams as a hobby and was good at finding trends among popular streamers and ways to increase views. When I started doing it myself, I made tens of thousands a month. The amount grew, covering my living expenses. I decided to invest the money. I wasn't using the investments went well, and I decided to try running a small company importing and selling goods. I was busy in a good way and fulfilled every day. I didn't have a family that would complain about me using the computer all the time. A few months later, I received a call from my parents who hadn't contacted me since I left home. "We want you to help James financially," they said. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. I wondered what could have happened to the person who just built a new house. My parents slowly began to explain the situation. My brother apparently held frequent parties after building his new house, interacting with various people such as bosses, executives, clients, and Emma's acquaintances. Among them, someone proposed an investment opportunity, and my brother ended up trusting the proposal. He wasted a large sum of money, lured by the promise of making big returns in just a few months. I was amazed. My brother had a decent job, so if he had just kept working hard, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. Who is the person who recommended the investment? Isn't it a scam? I asked. No, it's not. It's one of Emma's acquaintances. My parents seemed to completely trust Emma. How much do you need? She was shocked when I asked. It was an amount that a company employee couldn't easily pay. Is that really the amount my brother needs alone? I asked my parents hesitantly, and as expected, they gave me the answer I feared. We were also introduced to the same investment. My parents hesitated before responding. I can't come up with that much money so easily, sorry. I tried to hang up the phone, but they clung on, saying, "We're your real family, help us out in times like these." Real family. Too little, too late. Sorry, but I'm busy, and I'm a stranger to you, right? With that, I hung up the phone. Later on, somehow they found out, and my parents' and brother's families showed up. The location was the office of the company I run. I was in a business meeting at the time. My secretary informed me, "There are guests here for you, President." I don't have any other appointments. Who are they? I shuddered. I apologized to the business partner I was meeting with and excused myself for a moment. When I went to the reception area, there stood my pregnant sister-in-law Emma, my brother, and my parents. "You're running a company, huh?" "Well, it's much smaller than where I work." My brother smirked and looked around the office. "Who are you?" I asked, pretending I didn't know them. "What's with the attitude?" My brother shouted, losing his temper. My mother intervened and explained, "We talked about this before, but we need your support. You're running a company, so you can help us out, right?" My mother shamelessly asked for money, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, it's an important time for our family. Emma is about to give birth. The child's growth isn't good, so we need to see a good doctor. Please, Ruby." My father and Emma chimed in, acting as if it was my duty to pay off everyone's debts. Employees occasionally walked by the reception area, glancing over with concern. Wanting to get rid of them as quickly as possible, I said, "Please leave, you're causing a disturbance." My brother exploded with anger again. "What? We're a disturbance? We came all the way here, and that's how you talk to your family," he yelled. The employees passing by stopped in their tracks, facing them. My brother started to make a scene. "Do you all know this girl dropped out of middle school? She was a shut-in, no NEET." He seemed intent on humiliating me if I didn't give him the money. However, the employees responded with words my brother didn't expect. "We know, everyone knows. The president's background, me too. The president hires many people from similar situations. Is there a problem?" My brother, who usually socializes only with highly educated and high-income people, seemed caught off guard and stammered, Instead, my father said, "What a pathetic company. Just a gathering of needs." My brother chimed in, "Exactly. Companies that do business with a place like this can't be any good either," he yelled loudly. At that moment, the president of the company I was meeting with, who had been waiting in the reception room, came out. He must have heard the shouting. My brother's face went blank and then turned pale as he looked at the man. He lowered his gaze. "What's wrong, James?" Emma asked my brother. "Idiot, don't say my name," my brother whispered to Emma, but it was too late. James, oh, it's you." The company president walked straight up to my brother and looked at his face. "You're the guy who always falls, Mr. Long, the division manager, right? We owe a lot to your company." His company was also a client of my brother's company. My brother was sweating profusely from every pore on his face. I guess I'm not memorable since we're not a decent company." When the president threw my brother's words back at him, my brother went, "Oh," and froze up. My father, mother, and Emma also sensed the trouble and fell silent. I apologized to the president again, ignoring them. "I'm sorry for taking up your valuable time. I'll ask them to leave." "Oh, are you sure?" "I have time today, so I don't mind waiting." "You can prioritize talking with your family." "No, they're not my family." I glanced at my parents' and brother's family as I said this. "They're complete strangers." After that, my parents' and brother's family were kicked out of the company. Maybe they were stunned by the exchange with the company president, but they left quietly. As for how my job was exposed, I was curious, so I looked into it and found out that Emma was the cause. She had a friend who was well informed about investment-related information and always had her antenna up. There was a young woman in her 20s who was making a name for herself as a talented trader and company owner. Emma was surprised when she saw a photo in the media and realized that this woman was her husband's sister, who she had heard was a middle school dropout and neat. Emma told my brother and parents about this and suggested they ask me for money. Since I was busy during the day and didn't answer the phone, and I didn't call them back after they asked me for money, they came to my company. I had been treating them like complete strangers, so I decided not to get involved with them anymore. But I couldn't help but look into Emma. I was curious about her friend being involved in my parents' and brother's financial failures. That friend was Emma's ex-boyfriend. In fact, they seemed to still be involved. By the way, the child in Emma's womb wasn't my brother's but the child of that investor. No way, my brother was devastated. It's natural to be upset since everything had been a lie. Furthermore, it seems she had been extracting money from several other men under the guidance of her ex-boyfriend. Of course, my brother and Emma ended up getting a divorce. Emma is now under police custody, along with her ex-boyfriend. However, the lost money won't be returned anytime soon. Ever since the incident at my company, my brother's position at his workplace worsened. In his 20s, he was transferred to a so-called window side department and eventually resigned. He couldn't work there for long and eventually resigned. Possibly irritated by the financial failure and trouble surrounding my brother, my father got into trouble when the president witnessed him losing his temper with a subcontractor at work. After investigating his work attitude, he was fired. Apparently, he had been saying things like junior high or high school graduates are worthless, and if you didn't graduate from a certain university or higher, you're not a real person, similar to what he used to say to me. So both my brother and father ended up losing their jobs. The family, or rather former family, whose income decreased, still contacts me, saying, "Let's live together." By the way, I had them banned from entering my company's building, so they can't force their way in anymore. With everything that happened, we're still family, right? The unemployed trio tries various tactics to cling to me, but my answer is always the same: I don't know you. You're complete strangers to me. I have no intention of giving any other response in the future.
I pulled into the driveway of Tristan's house, heart swelling with excitement to surprise my sweet grandson Eli on his 8th birthday. Little did I know the surprise would be entirely mine, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son and daughter-in-law. The doorbell went unanswered after several rings, so I tried the handle. Unlocked. "Hello? Tristan? Nadia?" I called out, letting myself inside. An eerie silence blanketed the house, normally filled with the laughter and pitter-patter of little feet. A muffled whimper drew me towards the staircase. Under the stairs, a small door caught my eye, the kind meant for storage, not for... No, the thought was too horrifying to entertain. "Eli? Honey, are you in there?" I gasped, chest tightening. "Grandma?" His tiny voice trembled from behind the door. "Help me, please." With shaking hands, I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind, each more disturbing than the next. I steadied myself against the wall, guilt and dread crashing over me in waves for not visiting sooner. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a toolbox and grabbed a hammer, my fragile grasp on composure crumbling. "Stand back, sweetie." 3 solid strikes, and the flimsy door splintered open. There he was, my beautiful grandson, cowering in the dimly lit space, eyes wide with fear and relief. Tears stained his pale cheeks, his vibrant red hair matted and unkempt. "Oh, Eli." I choked out, scooping him into my arms, cradling him close. He clung to me with a desperation that broke my heart into pieces. I'm so sorry, I mumbled into his hair, cursing myself for 1,000 should-haves and could-haves. His small body trembled like a leaf against me. Once the initial shock subsided, a burning rage replaced the sorrow. How could Tristan and Nadia do this? What kind of parents? No, what kind of human beings? "It's okay, honey, you're safe now," I assured him, doing my best to keep my tone even and soothing, despite the maelstrom within. "Can you tell me how long?" He shook his head fiercely, eyes squeezed shut as if to block out the memories. "Too long. Days, I think. I'd yell and bang, but they never came. Just slid food under sometimes." White-hot fury coursed through my veins, and I silently vowed to ensure Tristan and Nadia paid for this unforgivable cruelty towards their own flesh and blood. But first, I needed to get Eli out of this house of horrors. "Pack a bag. Anything you want to take with you. We're leaving." My tone brooked no argument. He nodded obediently, looking smaller and frailer than any child should. By the time I'd calmed down enough to call Tristan, the rage had crystallized into a cold, hard knot of determination in my gut. He picked up after several rings, utterly nonchalant, like he hadn't just committed one of the worst betrayals a parent could. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" Those 3 words, spoken so casually, were the spark that ignited my fury into an inferno. "What do you mean, what's up?" I snarled into the phone, my fury simmering just below the surface. "I'm at your house, and I just found Eli locked in a closet under the stairs." There was a brief pause, and I could practically see Tristan's nonchalant shrug through the phone. "So? That's just how we discipline him when he misbehaves. He knows the rules." My jaw dropped, revulsion churning in my gut. How could he be so callous about treating his own son like a prisoner? "You can't be serious, Tristan. He's just a little boy. Don't you dare try to tell me how to parent my own kid, Mom." His voice took on an unpleasant edge. "You're overreacting as usual. He's fine, just throwing one of his tantrums." "Overreacting? You locked your 8-year-old child in a cramped, dark space for days with barely any food or human contact. What's wrong with you?" I was practically shouting now, anger and disbelief warring within me. "We have it under control," he said with an infuriating calmness that made my blood boil. "This doesn't concern you. Stay out of it." I opened my mouth to unleash another verbal lashing, but the dial tone cut me off. He'd hung up. Chest heaving, I stared at my trembling hands as a chilling realization crept over me. This was no one-time disciplinary tactic gone too far. The way Tristan had spoken, so coldly and matter-of-fact, hinted at something much more sinister. An ingrained pattern of cruelty, of depriving an innocent child of his basic rights and needs. Shaking my head, I leaned back against the wall, fighting against the swell of nausea. How could my own son, my flesh and blood, be capable of such monstrous behavior? What kind of person had he become while I wasn't watching? Unbidden, memories flickered through my mind. Happy childhood moments, Tristan's bright smile and pealing laughter as we baked cookies or played in the yard. It felt like a lifetime ago, those echoes of the warm, loving boy I'd raised. Where had I gone wrong? What had warped and twisted him into this shell of a man? Or had the seeds of cruelty lurked beneath the surface all along, only to bloom once I looked away? A tiny sniffle made me jerk upright. Eli stood in the hallway, bag clutched to his chest, eyes rimmed with fresh tears. Of course he'd overheard every ugly word. Crossing the room in 2 long strides, I gathered him into my arms, murmuring soft, soothing words into his hair. "It's gonna be okay, honey. I'm gonna make sure they never ever hurt you again." And in that moment, as his small arms wound around my neck, my path became clear. No more agonizing over where Tristan had strayed. It didn't matter now. He was beyond reach, beyond saving maybe. But Eli, that sweet, innocent little boy, still had a chance at a decent life. A life full of kindness, love, and stability that every child deserved. Even if it meant waging war against my own son, I would stop at nothing to rescue him from this nightmare. Settling Eli into the passenger seat, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you pick a movie for us to watch at my place? Something with happy endings." He nodded, mustering up a watery grin that tugged at my heart. In that moment, I made a silent vow. By the time we reached our happy ending, Tristan would face the consequences for his unforgivable crimes. No matter what it took, I would make sure of it. The drive back to my place was a blur, my mind spinning with half-formed plans of how to handle the situation with Tristan and Nadia. One thing was certain, I couldn't take them on alone. I needed allies. My first call was to Dale, my estranged husband. We'd fallen out of touch over the years, our marriage slowly eroding until the distance became a chasm. But he was still Eli's grandfather, and I had to hope some shred of paternal instinct remained. "Dale, it's Lorraine," I said when he picked up, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I need your help with something." There was a pregnant pause, then a resigned sigh. "What is it this time?" Clenching my jaw, I willed myself to remain calm. "It's about Eli, our grandson." That seemed to get his attention. "Go on." The words came tumbling out in a breathless rush. Eli's captivity, Tristan's shocking dismissal of it all, my own fears for the boy's well-being. To his credit, Dale listened in stone-faced silence until I finally trailed off. "You're telling me our son had his own kid locked up, like some kind of prisoner?" His voice was dangerously low. "Yes." I glanced over at Eli, slumped against the window in an exhausted sleep. And judging by how casual Tristan was about it, I don't think this was the first time. Another heavy pause then. "That's it. I'm calling the cops. We'll have those two psychos arrested for child endangerment." "Wait," I cut him off sharply. As satisfying as that idea was, it felt too rash, too risky. "We can't go to the authorities until we have rock-solid proof. You know how the system can fail kids." "So what do you suggest?" My gaze settled on Eli's sleeping form, and a steely resolve solidified within me. "We need to investigate on our own first. Figure out exactly what's going on and gather evidence of any wrongdoing, so it's airtight." "You want us to perform a full background check on our own son?" Dale sounded skeptical. "On both of them," I clarified grimly. "There has to be some explanation for why they're treating Eli so horrendously. We find that, we'll get to the bottom of this whole mess." A heavy silence then. "Fine, but not because I care about that boy's welfare anymore." His voice dripped with disdain. "Just because he's my grandson, you know, bloodline and all that." I bristled at his callousness, but bit back a scathing retort. I'd deal with Dale's indifference towards Eli later. For now, I had to play along if I wanted a hope of gaining his help. "Okay then, we start digging into their lives first thing tomorrow. Finances, personal records, everything. No stone left unturned." Dale grunted in assent. "And if we find anything?" A burst of vindictive satisfaction surged through me. "Then we make them pay." The next few days passed by in a whirlwind of information gathering. Between my tenacious research skills and Dale's business connections, we slowly unpicked every tangled thread of Tristan and Nadia's lives. Their finances were in shambles, racked with debt and comic strings of bad investments. A large portion of debt seemed tied to Nadia's previous marriage, which ended messily and likely cost a small fortune in legal fees. Speaking of her ex, I made a point to track him down. The details he shared painted an ugly picture of Nadia's past: accusations of infidelity, substance abuse, even violence. Could she still be clinging to those toxic patterns? As for Tristan, there were signs of shady business dealings and despicable con artistry. Several former employers and partners had fallen victim to his schemes over the years. Had he been grooming Eli as his next payday? "You think they've been stealing from the kid?" Dale wondered grimly when I shared my suspicions. "Seems like the type of lowlife move they'd pull." I clenched my jaw, a wave of nausea crashing over me. The more I learned, the more monstrous my own son and daughter-in-law became. Raking a hand through my hair, I turned to face Dale with a look of grim determination. "Well, we can't let them get away with it any longer. It's time we put an end to their sick games." With our findings laid out before us, Dale and I began plotting our next moves. We had more than enough damning evidence against Tristan and Nadia. Now it was a matter of using it effectively. We could release it all to the media, let them crucify those two jackals in the court of public opinion, Dale suggested with relish. I shook my head, worrying my bottom lip. As satisfying as that would be, we can't. Not yet. It would just put Eli in the crosshairs and make him the victim all over again. Then what? Take it to the cops like I originally suggested? Exhaling slowly, I considered our options. Going through official channels could mean months of legal red tape and he said, she said battles. Meanwhile, Eli would suffer. No, we needed a surefire way to take them down swiftly while securing his safety, a way to force their hand and back them into a corner with no escape. I have a friend, I began slowly. From law school, Martha Wilkins. She's made a career handling cases just like this one. Crooked parents trying to milk their kids' inheritance, neglect, you name it. Understanding dawned in Dale's eyes. So you'll get this hotshot lawyer lady to put the screws to Tristan and Nadia? Air all their dirty laundry in court? Among other things, I replied cryptically. Help me gather up all the paperwork. I'll set up a meeting with Martha for tomorrow. Martha's office was as sleek and professional as I remembered, though her warm smile and sharp eyes were the same as ever. Lorraine, it's been too long. She enveloped me in a brief hug before guiding us to a pair of leather chairs. Though I must say, I wish our reunion was under better circumstances. With a sigh, I waved a hand at the boxes of files surrounding us. That's an understatement. Take a look at what we've uncovered about my son and daughter-in-law. For the next 2 hours, Martha pored over our findings with her trademark meticulous intensity. Her brow furrowed deeper with each new layer of depravity revealed, the financial deceptions, signs of blatant neglect, even the account from Nadia's ex-husband. I've heard of money-grubbing parents before, she muttered, shaking her head in disgust. But keeping their own child as a literal prisoner in the name of fleecing his trust fund? That's a new low, even for me. Unconsciously, my fists clenched in my lap. So you'll take the case? Do everything in your power to make sure Tristan and Nadia face the consequences? You don't even need to ask. Martha's expression was one of grim resolve. I'll call in every favor I can to push this through the courts at top speed. We'll bury those two beneath an avalanche of evidence before they know what hit them. She leaned back, fixing me with an intent look. But I'll need your help, too. As Eli's closest living relatives, your testimony and cooperation will be instrumental. I met her gaze steadily. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes to protect that boy. A ghost of a smile played across Martha's lips. That's what I wanted to hear. Over the next few weeks, a whirlwind of depositions, documentation, and strategy sessions consumed every free moment. Martha was ruthlessly efficient, anticipating every possible angle of defense Tristan and Nadia might attempt. At her urging, I took steps to be appointed as Eli's legal guardian, should we wrest him from their custody. It was a lengthy, draining process, but I gladly endured it all with the goal of giving him a stable home in sight. When at last the court date arrived, armed with a veritable armory of evidence, and flanked by Martha's wily paralegal team, I felt an odd sense of calm. The fireworks would come soon enough. Are you sure you want to do this today? Dale eyed me sidelong as we strode up the courthouse steps, Eli's small hand encased in mine. In front of the whole family, on his birthday of all days? My jaw set in a stubborn line. It has to be today. They've had this coming for too long. In truth, I'd chosen this date and venue very deliberately. Our entire extended clan would be gathered at Tristan and Nadia's place for Eli's 8th birthday party later. What better way to expose their sins against their own flesh and blood than surrounded by all those they'd deceived? I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they realized the Negligent Parents of the Year award was theirs. Sure enough, my son and daughter-in-law were already seated with the rest of the family when we arrived, the perfect picture of domestic bliss. A tide of expectant murmurs washed over the crowd as the group recognized Martha striding in behind us. Nadia was the first to spot us, her perfectly curated smile slipping ever so slightly. What's going on here? Tristan rose to his feet, all artificial joviality. I should be asking you three the same thing. What's with the hostility, Mom? Draping a supportive arm around Eli's shoulders, I leveled him with a look that could cut glass. Maybe you should ask your son about hostility. Confusion rippled through the assembled guests, but Nadia merely rolled her eyes in condescending amusement. For God's sake, Lorraine, not this again. Shut your mouth, Dale growled, and I started slightly at the venom in his tone. You don't get to dismiss her concerns after the sick crap you two pulled. Murmurs intensified, tinged with disbelief and unease. Martha stepped forward, cool and unruffled, as she spread a series of damning dossiers across the table. We have extensive documentation of your actions towards Elijah, including willful neglect, financial exploitation of his trust fund, and the unjustified deprivation of basic needs. She gestured for silence as shocked gasps erupted around the room. I'll skip the niceties and give you one opportunity to start making amends. Full custody of the boy will be transferred to Mrs. Hawthorne here immediately, pending the court's final ruling. You'll also repay every cent you siphoned from his accounts. There was a beat of stunned silence as the words sank in. Twin looks of abject horror twisted Tristan and Nadia's faces before morphing into snares of rage. You've got to be freaking kidding me. Tristan slammed his hands on the table, making several guests jump. Just because Mom had some stupid delusions about our parenting? You're blowing this way out of proportion. Get off your high horses, both of you. Nadia jutted her chin haughtily, a studied mask of disdain falling into place to conceal her panic. Our finances are none of your business, nor how we raise our son. My heart clenched at the way she refused to acknowledge Eli as her own. Martha arched an unimpressed eyebrow. So I'll take that as a refusal to cooperate, then? You're damn right. Tristan looked about 2 seconds from vaulting over the table. We don't have to listen to your self-righteous garbage. On the contrary. Another folder landed on the table with a thud, and the image of a familiar dingy room, harshly illuminated, filled the screen. You'll find this garbage quite enlightening, I think. A collective gasp rang out through the room as the grim reality set in. Surveillance footage of the tiny closet space where Eli had been imprisoned for days. His tear-stained face and muffled cries were plain as day, surrounded by harsh shadows and stifling walls. Tristan went ashen, mouth working soundlessly as Nadia slumped against her seat, hand fluttering to her mouth. I ground my teeth, fighting back the urge to throttle them both then and there. How dare they look so appalled now, after willingly inflicting such cruel conditions on their own child? The outrage poured forth from our friends and relatives in waves of angry shouting that drowned out all my instincts for vengeance. Because in that moment, the devastated look in Eli's eyes was all I could focus on. He didn't deserve any of this ugly airing of family secrets and toxic legacy of betrayal that wasn't his shame to carry. At that moment, I was fiercely glad Martha had taken charge. Her pragmatic ruthlessness spared Eli from having to witness our blistering condemnations of the parents who had so grievously failed him. No, he'd been through enough ugliness. It was time to start looking towards a future of healing. Gathering his slight form against me, I murmured low reassurances into his hair as the chaos swirled around us. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the beginning of something new, I realized with a surge of hope. A road towards redemption, away from this poisoned legacy of cruelty and neglect. Tristan and Nadia might have been battles lost, but the war for Eli's soul was just getting started. And this time, I was determined to win. The aftermath of our dramatic confrontation was a whirlwind that still makes my head spin in retrospect. Martha wasted no time, pressing her advantage with cold precision while Tristan and Nadia floundered. Within hours, emergency custody papers were signed and law enforcement was on the scene. Nadia dissolved into hysterics as they slapped cuffs on her wrists, shrieking invectives that would have made a sailor blush. Tristan, for his part, maintained a seething, sullen silence right up until they separated them for booking. Then the dam broke. Staring at me with undisguised loathing, he fought against the officer's restraints like a rabid dog. "You did this," he snarled, spittle flying. "You poisoned everything with your deluded vendetta." "Your actions poisoned this family," I shot back, unflinching even as Dale shifted protectively in front of Eli. "Maybe if you hadn't been so reckless with your son's well-being, so blind to anything but your greed." "He's not yours anymore," Tristan continued ranting, words slurring as his anger spiraled into near incoherency. "You don't get to sweep in and play hero after years of being a lousy, inattentive gar." The backhanded blow caught him square across the jaw, snapping his head sideways with a meaty thwack. Even the officers gave Dale a wide berth as he towered over Tristan's crumpled form, chest heaving like a bellows. "Don't you dare talk about what kind of grandparent she is," he growled through gritted teeth. "When your own twisted minds led you to torment an innocent child for money." Silence fell, heavy as a pall. Tristan glared up at his father through a mask of bloody spittle and swelling flesh, the fight temporarily beaten out of him. With a last contemptuous sneer, Dale shouldered past the stunned officers and came to collect Eli and me. "You did the right thing," he murmured gruffly into my hair as we embraced, the closest to affection he could muster in that moment. "That boy's better off with anyone but those two excuses for human beings." I squeezed him fiercely, the adrenaline high from the confrontation, rapidly waning to leave me drained, yet perversely buoyed by our victory. It was done. Eli was finally truly safe. All that remained was ensuring he got the love and care he deserved going forward. And that, I silently vowed, was a battle I would fight with every last breath. With the initial crisis resolved, a strange sort of limbo settled over us in the following weeks. Though the custody papers granted me temporary guardianship of Eli, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. I lost track of how many legal meetings, court dates, and blistering cross-examinations Martha put us through. Every shred of Tristan and Nadia's elaborate tangle of lies was meticulously unpicked, cauterized, and readied as exhibits. The fraud charges alone were damning, given the paper trail of diverted funds from Eli's trust account. But Martha assured me that the abuse charges, locking him away for days at a time, withholding food and necessities, would inevitably result in the maximum sentence. "The system doesn't take kindly to parents who view their own offspring as caged commodities," she said grimly. "We'll see they're made examples of." I could only nod, ignoring the unsettling relish in her tone. Personal feelings aside, Martha was a ruthless ally in this fight, and I wasn't about to argue with results. For his part, Eli remained a subdued shadow throughout the proceedings. Despite our best efforts, he shied away from counseling and group activities, haunted eyes downcast whenever Tristan or Nadia's names arose. "It's going to take time for those wounds to heal," Dale cautioned whenever I fretted over the boy's withdrawal. And rationally, I knew he was right. Overcoming the trauma and emotional scarring inflicted by one's own parents couldn't be undone overnight. But that comprehension did little to ease the mounting guilt and worry gnawing at my heart. Had I failed Eli by not recognizing the signs sooner? All these years of missing holidays and birthdays, could I ever make that up to him now? The answers didn't come easily. But bit by bit, through patience and stubborn determination on both our parts, the walls began to show hairline cracks. It started small. Eli timidly agreeing to color with me one quiet afternoon, while Dale watched his loud courtroom shows, as oblivious to our bonding as ever. From there, we progressed to games of Go Fish and Crazy Eights, my genuine laughter at his horrendous bluffing faces earning the first tiny quirks of his lips. Before long, laughter and chattiness seeped back into the house like a palliative balm after the rolling darkness. I introduced Eli to swimming, his initial trepidation melting into uninhibited glee as he cut through the waters with strong, sure strokes. An art class yielded the first vibrant, unrestrained streaks of color across fresh canvases, and through it all, the fragile bond between us grew stronger with each new smile, each peal of laughter replaying in my mind like a soothing melody. The boy I'd feared was too wounded to recover, blossomed with each day of freedom from his parents' toxic influence. There were still bad days, of course. Triggers that sent Eli retreating into a pensive shell of himself for hours or even days at a time. But we weathered those storms together, side by side, and emerged stronger for it in the end. On one such day, the sun had long since set beyond the den's picture windows before Eli stirred from his hunched position on the couch. Rubbing his eyes, he shuffled over and wordlessly crawled into my lap, nestling against me in a contented silence. My breath caught as my arms instinctively folded around his small frame, marveling at the implicit trust in his actions. Setting my chin atop his tousled curls, I let out a shaky sigh, gathering the shreds of composure that loneliness and fresh memories of Tristan's cruelty had frayed. In that moment, Gently rocking my grandson, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Him, from that haunted, hollowed-out husk I'd first beheld in the closet. And me, from the guilt-racked woman tormented over failing to prevent his suffering. Holding this quietly content child, bruised but not broken by the ugliness he'd endured, filled me with a sense of purpose more profound than I'd ever known. Scars would remain, but they didn't have to define him or me. All that mattered now was nurturing the resilience and fighting spirit, persevering against all odds. And that was a battle. I vowed silently into the stillness that I would fight beside him every single day until my last breath. The night of the sentencing hearing was one I'll never forget. Tristan and Nadia were led in wearing matching orange jumpsuits, hands and feet shackled. Where Nadia had her head bowed in sullen defeat, Tristan met my gaze head-on, with undisguised hatred burning in his eyes. I returned it with a look of cold indifference. He no longer had any power to rattle me. Martha stood ramrod straight beside us, lips pressed into a thin line of grim satisfaction as the judge entered. She'd cautioned us against expecting the maximum sentences, but her reputation preceded her. I had a feeling the so-called justice system wouldn't dare cross her. And I was right. After a mercifully brief recounting of the relevant facts, the hammer came down harder than I dared hope. For the crimes of child abuse, neglect, fraud, and embezzlement against a minor child's trust fund, I sentence you both to 15 years imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Nadia swayed on her feet as if struck, complexion going deathly pale. But my eyes were locked on Tristan, drinking in the dismay and impotent fury twisting his features into an ugly rictus. Additionally, you will be compelled to make full restitution of the stolen funds to Mr. Elijah Hawthorne upon your release. Failure to comply will result in an extension of your sentences. Martha's shark-like smile was triumphant as she caught my eye amid the courtroom din, mouthing, "I told you so." She'd played her gambit flawlessly, as always. Tristan was still yelling his outrage as he was hauled away, vitriol spewing from his lips. But the hatred in his eyes when they met mine burned itself into my memory, searing and indelible. I refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching away, because in the end, he and Nadia were the ones vanquished, beaten at their own twisted game by the family whose bond they'd tried to shatter. It was a lesson I hoped haunted their every waking moment behind bars. Eli watched the whole proceeding in numb silence. I ached to pull him close, to shield him from the ugliness being laid so cruelly bare. But he was no longer a scared little boy. He'd borne witness to the depths of human cruelty and prevailed through courage and resilience. This was closure, plain and simple. One last look at the monsters who'd tried so viciously to break him before leaving them behind forever. The drive home passed in a blur, none of us speaking. What words could encapsulate the profound shift this day signified? It was Eli who finally broke the heavy silence as we pulled up to the house, fixing me with those serious green eyes that had seen far too much darkness for one so young. "I'm glad it's really over," he murmured. "That they got what they deserved, you know." I reached across the bench seat to squeeze his hand. "Me too, honey. It's all over now." The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of press, legal wrangling, and celebration from friends and family over our hard-won justice. But the moment that stood out most vividly was Eli's first art show at his new school. He'd been champing at the bit to show me his latest masterpieces, brimming with the pride and excitement of any kid his age. And finally, on opening night, I got to bask in the brilliant splashes of color and rebirth he'd committed to canvas. Each one was a searing reflection of the journey that led us here. Dark, muted tones juxtaposed against explosions of vibrant life. Harsh lines fracturing then melding back together in a mosaic of regeneration. Wordless stories of tragedy and redemption laid bare in acrylic strokes, more poignant than any writer could capture. "That one there is how I felt for a long time," Eli explained, gripping my hand as we moved from canvas to canvas. His voice was contemplative, worlds away from the hollow echoes I'll never unhear from that closet. Scared, sad, like everything was cracking apart into pieces that I couldn't fix. He paused before a canvas emblazoned with a brilliant phoenix taking flight, wings unfurling in a blaze of crimson and gold. But this one is us now, rising up out of all the ugliness and hurt to start over, finding the color and beauty in life on the other side of the storm. Does that make sense? I pulled him close, blinking back tears of fierce pride and wonder at the resilient, insightful young man he was blossoming into. Another example of the tenacity with which new life can spring from unimaginable darkness. It makes perfect sense, I murmured into his hair. Because in that moment, bathed in the kaleidoscopic rebirth of his art, I saw the first rays of the new dawn we'd both fought so hard to reach. And as I held him, surrounded by this latest rebirth, one truth became startlingly clear. We would meet each fresh challenge rise over the horizon together, standing united before whatever storms lay ahead. Mother and grandson soldiering onwards into the light.
I grew up in a small town in Texas, where the local saying was, everyone knows everyone. My father worked as a translator at the U.S. Embassy, so my childhood was full of stories about different countries and languages. When I turned 18, my family moved to England because of my father's job, and that's where I attended college. During my years at Oxford, I immersed myself in computer technology, business management, and economics. I thrived in the challenging academic environment and built lifelong friendships, particularly with my sister Patricia. After graduating, I returned to the U.S., ready to make my own mark. My name is Dan Colton, and before I get into the more difficult part of this story, I need to introduce you to my ex-wife, Emily. I keep in shape by jogging 2 laps around the park every morning when I can. I'm 5'10" and weigh 180 pounds, staying fit by swimming several miles a week and hitting an old-school gym twice a week for weightlifting and MMA training. I'm not a martial arts expert, but I can hold my own, which is why most of my weight is muscle. Despite my degrees, a master's in computer technology, a postgraduate in business management, and a bachelor's in economics from Oxford University. People often say I somewhat resemble George Clooney. Because my father worked as a translator at the U.S. Embassy, I stayed to finish my studies while he returned to the U.S. to work as a computer repair specialist after his service. Now, I manage a well-known company and oversee a new program designed for various applications, from gaming to military use. This program's ability to handle issues in real time is crucial, and it should be ready within 6 months to a year. I love my sister Patricia, or Pat as I call her, and she loves me. We're very close, sharing everything and keeping no secrets. She's 2 years younger than me and currently works as a junior partner at a reputable New York law firm. Emily, my ex-wife, keeps fit by going to the gym at least 4 times a week. She's 5'3" with a stunning figure, 34B bust, 22-inch waist, and 33-inch hips, with red hair and green eyes to match her fiery temper. Her face is angelic, and her smile can light up a room. She's a corporate attorney at XYZ, a PR and advertising firm, where she works after earning her law degree. We met at Pat's graduation. Pat, Emily's sister, and Amy were roommates and introduced us at the graduation party. Coincidentally, we lived just 3 miles apart in the mid-sized town of Freestone, Texas. We started dating 6 months later and hit it off, getting married 6 months after that. After our wedding, Emily began her career at XYZ as a junior attorney with a modest salary plus bonuses. I worked for ABC Flight Controllers, where I assembled and dissected software code for a mid-5-figure salary and bonus. The 3-bedroom house I inherited from my grandparents was in a good neighborhood. My sister received a lump sum inheritance, while Emily's sister and parents stayed in New York. My parents had retired to Florida. Twice a year, we hosted family gatherings for Thanksgiving and Christmas at various locations. Life was good. We were happy with our modest income, nice cars, and 2 vacations every year. After 2 years, Emily was promoted to junior partner, and things began to change. She started going out with her friends on Friday nights a few times a month, and worked late more often. Naturally, I became suspicious and went about my usual routines, like reading her emails, checking her underwear, and even installing a keylogger on her laptop. Although I knew I was paranoid, it didn't mean my concerns were unfounded. I even followed her one night. Nothing inappropriate happened. She didn't even dance with other men. So why did I feel something was wrong in our marriage? Emily wanted to become a senior partner before starting a family, which would take about another 5 years. She was happy with her job. Meanwhile, I felt stuck in mine, with no opportunities for advancement. Since it was a family-owned business, promotions only went to relatives, no matter how unqualified they were. I decided to start my own computer repair business, not the kind where people bring their laptops to a shop. I targeted businesses needing enhanced security systems and system upgrades. Before jumping in, I did a business analysis and expected a slow start, but within a year, I would earn more than my current job. I sat down with Emily to explain that while the initial year would be tough, we would be better off in the long run. I avoided mentioning the new software I was developing to keep things simple. She was completely against the idea, questioning why I would risk everything when we were doing well. She was thriving, and I was in a dead-end job. Emily and I had always kept our finances separate except for our joint account, which covered all the bills. We each contributed equally for monthly expenses and saved the rest. I left my job and started my new business using savings and a loan on my house. I began advertising and made phone calls from a small workshop I rented, which had an attached office. In 3 months, I was satisfied, breaking even. My work on the new software was also progressing well. Then one evening, Emily hit me with shocking news. She was 3 months pregnant with twins. Paranoia set in, and I checked the timeline of her activities. She'd been in Miami for a week on business. It struck me then. She was cheating. I immediately decided to get a DNA test. From the moment she learned of the pregnancy, she cut off all affection, at least toward me. She insisted on abstaining, fearing damage to the babies, even though both I and the doctor reassured her she was overreacting. Despite this, we did the usual things. I attended her relaxation classes, massaged her feet every night, rubbed oil on her growing belly to prevent stretch marks, and put up with her increasingly sour moods. Meanwhile, my company was growing. I hired a fresh computer technician, Greg, and appointed May as the receptionist. Emily showed no interest in my business, so I never bothered discussing it with her. The day finally arrived when she went into labor. I was with a client, discussing a server upgrade, when I got the call. The client congratulated me and sent me on my way. Emily was already at the hospital, her go-bag ready and waiting. I rushed over, grabbed her suitcase and the DNA kit, and drove her to the hospital. She was admitted to a private room in the prenatal ward. After the doctor checked her, he said it would still take some time. Despite my doubts about the twins' paternity, I was excited about the possibility of becoming a father. The doctor suggested I go home, saying it would be a while yet, and promised to call me when it was time for the delivery. I went home, ate, sat around, and eventually fell asleep. The phone rang. Emily was fully dilated, experiencing contractions every 7 minutes. The babies were almost here. It was 2:30 a.m. I grabbed a coat and rushed to the car. Why do babies always seem to arrive at odd hours? I sped to the hospital, making it just in time to watch the first baby being delivered. A few minutes later, the second followed. The nurse checked both babies, counting their fingers and toes, then washed them. While her back was turned, I swabbed each baby for the DNA test as she helped clean up my wife. Even though I already felt a connection, I needed to know for sure if they were mine. Emily looked at me with sad eyes and said she loved me as I kissed her gently. Emily was moved to the recovery unit to rest, and they advised me to go home. The next day, I called everyone to share the wonderful news. The grandparents were thrilled, eager to see their new grandchildren. Pat and Amy promised to arrange time off to visit their niece and nephew. On my way to the hospital, carrying flowers for Emily, I dropped off the DNA kit and was told the results would take about 10 days. Emily would be staying at the hospital. The doctor said she had suffered severe tears that needed time to heal. For the next 5 days, I visited her daily, but she seemed distant and quiet. When I asked the doctor about her behavior, he simply replied, "She'll get over it. It happens sometimes." He mentioned she would be discharged on Saturday afternoon. During my visit on Friday, I counted down the hours until I could bring them home. The nursery was ready for our new babies. Saturday morning, I made sure everything was set up for her return. The safety cots were securely fastened. At 1:30, I headed to the hospital to bring my family home. I walked straight to her room, but it was empty. "Where are my wife and kids?" I asked the nurse. "Another man has already taken them," she replied. "Who?" I demanded, panic rising. I tried calling Emily's cell, but there was no response. The senior nurse arrived to handle the situation, reporting it to security, who then contacted the police. When the officers arrived, a man and a woman, both detectives, were shown to the security room to review the footage from that morning. They returned to inform me, "It seems Emily left with the man willingly. We know who he is, but we can't disclose his identity." Stunned, I asked, "What am I supposed to do now?" "Go home, Mr. Colton," they advised. "We will be in touch." Sick with worry, I sat at home, anxiously waiting for news. Around 6 that evening, I noticed the same 2 detectives knocking on my door. When neither looked me in the eye, I asked, "What's going on?" The woman spoke first. "Mr. Colton, we can't tell you where your wife and children are, but they are safe." "I'm really sorry," she added softly. I stared at her, confused. "I have no idea where my family is, and Emily won't answer her phone." The male detective stepped forward. "I regret to inform you that your wife left you and took the kids. She stated that her attorney would be in contact soon." My heart sank as I listened in disbelief. "Please don't do anything foolish," the detective warned. "I'd hate to have to take further action." They left, leaving me alone once again. My hands trembled, and I felt hollow inside, on the verge of being sick. I had hit rock bottom. I started to cry. Sunday morning, I woke up having cried myself to sleep. I showered and put on some decent clothes. I made breakfast on autopilot. After eating, feeling a bit better, I thought, maybe Emily's parents know something. I called her dad. "Hello," he answered. "Hi, it's me," I said quickly. "Everyone left, saying they'd be visiting next weekend. I need to tell you what happened." He tried to respond, but I cut him off. "Listen, I don't want excuses. Just call Emily and get back to me." Can't believe she would act like this. By lunchtime, I went to Denny's for an unhealthy meal. A mega burger with fries, onion rings, and a beer. Feeling a bit better, I returned home and checked the answering machine. No messages. I turned on the TV, but my mind kept replaying the events of the last few days. Eventually, I gave up. It was past midnight, so I went to bed. My thoughts wouldn't quiet down, so I got up at 6 the next morning, showered, and went downstairs for breakfast. I was sitting there staring at the news on TV when the phone rang. It was Emily's attorney. "Can you meet later today?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. 2 o'clock works." He hung up. Maybe now I'll get some answers, I thought. At his office, I was shown in immediately. I expected to see just the attorney, but Jimmy Prescott, her boss, was also there, sitting on the sofa. I decided to keep silent for the moment, needing answers. This made everyone visibly uneasy. The lawyer finally spoke. "Mr. Colton, you're here to discuss the terms of your divorce from Mrs. Emily Colton. Your wife and Mr. Prescott have a brief proposal for you. She will divorce you on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. You'll keep your business, your property, your retirement, basically all of your savings. She'll do the same. However, you must also sign documents allowing Mr. Prescott to adopt your children. In return, Mr. Prescott will deposit $2 million into an account of your choosing." I jumped up so fast I almost knocked over the desk. "Absolutely not," I shouted. "My kids are not for sale at any price. You can have that strumpet for nothing. I don't want anything to do with her, so get lost." Emily stood up and spoke softly, trying to calm me down. "Dan, I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Jimmy and I have been seeing each other for a while, and we really want to get married. He wants to adopt the kids because, sadly, he can't have any of his own." I cut her off. "Oh, so the kids would have everything, right? A big house, the best schools, the perfect life?" I sneered. "And what do I have to offer? An old rundown house and a small computer repair business?" My voice dripped with sarcasm. "Is that why you want out? Because I lack ambition, money, and can't give the kids a better future?" Her tone turned icy. "If you refuse to sign, I'll take you to the cleaners. I'll take your house, half your income, half your savings, your 401k, your business, and I'll make sure you never see your kids again. You're in a no-win situation. Our way, you at least get something." "Go to hell, Emily," I snapped. "You have no claim to the house. It's mine. Half of nothing is still nothing. I don't have savings, and you earn more than I do, so support payments will be minimal. I'll see my kids every other weekend and happily pay child support. As for my business, without me, it doesn't exist. As for your threats, see you in court." With that, I turned and stormed out, leaving 3 stunned people behind. I went straight to Denny's for dinner. After eating, I drove home to a cold, empty house. I sat with a beer, staring at the TV, furious at myself for not checking the peephole before opening the door. I woke up around 11 to a knock, still a bit groggy. As I opened the door, it was slammed inward with such force that I staggered back, but managed to stay on my feet. 3 men rushed in, trying to grab me, but I was fully awake now. I struck the first one in the throat with extended knuckles. The second guy tried to put me in a headlock and force me to the floor. While I was breaking free, the third man hit my shin with a baseball bat, and I fell. I began losing consciousness as the first man lay on the ground, choking. The other 2 kicked me, assuming they'd finish me off. They needed to leave enough evidence for the police to follow up. As I started to black out, their leader lifted me to my feet. Now, be a good boy and sign the papers, or we'll be back, he said, his face inches from mine. I headbutted him in the nose, feeling the warm blood splatter across my face. Now I had his DNA. I quickly pulled my handkerchief from my pocket and dabbed some of his blood onto it. Screaming, he turned away, clutching his face and cursing at me. I started to black out again, only to be jolted awake when he kicked me in the ribs. I fainted, collapsing against the wall. I woke up slowly, hearing voices, but unable to recognize who they belonged to. I saw vague shapes in the room, but couldn't identify them. Then darkness took over again. The next time I woke, bright sunlight filled the room. I looked around and saw a woman seated in a chair. It took me a moment to recognize her as Cam, the wife of my MMA instructor, Nick Wright. I tried to speak, but my mouth was too dry. I croaked out a sound. Cam came over and pressed the call button. A nurse came in and checked my vitals. She smiled and asked how I was feeling. The ice chips she gave me tasted better than the finest scotch. Cam quickly dialed her phone with one hand while holding mine. "How are you feeling?" "Glad to have you back among the living, Dan. You really scared us for a while," she said. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I croaked. "A truck might have done less damage," she replied with a wry smile. At that moment, a doctor entered. "I'm so glad to see you finally awake. You've been in a coma for 3 days, but I think you're on the mend now." "Doc, could I get something to eat? I feel like I could eat a whole cow. Just pull out the horns and wipe its rear," I groaned. Everyone laughed, but when I tried to join in, the pain in my side made me nearly pass out. The doctor adjusted my pain medication and showed me how to use the button for more morphine. I drifted in and out of a morphine-induced sleep for what seemed like hours. When Nick finally arrived, I realized it had been just over an hour. He filled me in on what happened. I'd been attacked in my home, and the neighborhood watch found my front door open. They called the police and an ambulance, and the officers found Nick's number in my phone under ice, in case of emergency. Either Nick or Cam had been with me ever since. He then described my injuries. A fractured left tibia, shattered radius, 2 cracked ribs, a perforated lung, a damaged kidney, a cracked eye socket, and a broken nose. "Other than that, you're fine," he joked, making me smile. When Nick and Cam left to go home, a detective named Graham Coles entered the room. "How much of the attack do you remember?" he asked. I recounted the leader's message. When I mentioned having a DNA sample on my handkerchief, he placed it in an evidence bag, clearly pleased. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, the room was empty, shrouded in darkness. The next day, Nick visited and offered to let me stay at his house until I could move around on my own again. I asked him to pick up my mail from my place, and he agreed. I also inquired if he knew a good divorce attorney. He nodded and promised to get back to me. After a bit more conversation, I drifted off to sleep again. When I woke up, a nurse was checking my vitals. She mentioned that everything looked good and clean, with no signs of infection. She changed my bandages shortly after they brought me some food. Eating with one arm was tricky, so she had to cut up my meal. I slept well that night and woke up feeling refreshed. The nurse gave me a bed bath, but I didn't react. I was still too sore. Later, Nick arrived with a stunning woman who he introduced as my new lawyer, Grace Miles. She confirmed that I still had visitation rights for my kids and agreed to take on my case. We reviewed the situation together before she left. Nick stayed with me while I sorted through the mail he had brought. When I opened the DNA results, I initially felt a wave of rage, but then I started to laugh. Neither of the kids was mine. Emily had been cheating on both Jimmy and me, a classic cheater. I explained the situation to Nick once I stopped laughing, and his face went pale. Having had a change of heart, I decided to discuss a settlement. I called Grace and asked her to set up a meeting with Emily, Jimmy, their attorney, and myself at the hospital. She arranged for us to meet the next day in a borrowed office. When Nick wheeled me into the room, my arm and leg in casts, tubes running into my body, Emily looked flawless. My face, like most of my body, was bruised black and blue. Emily seemed shocked at my appearance, while Jimmy just smirked. Staring at them, I began, "Well, I changed my mind after some of your friends visited, and don't bother denying it, Jimmy. The last thing your thugs said was sign the papers. Who else would want me to sign over the kids without the $2 million incentive?" I handed over the new paperwork my lawyer had prepared. "Your original proposal made it seem like I was selling the kids, and my lawyer explained how that could open me up to human trafficking charges. Nice try, though." Their attorney eyed the document suspiciously as I continued. "My lawyer and I have drafted a new settlement. Here it is." Grace handed the paperwork to their attorney, with copies for Emily and Jimmy. Your offer is nothing like ours. Let me break it down for you. I keep my house, everything in it, my savings, my business, both cars, and my wife's jewelry. Additionally, she deposits the $18,000 from her not-so-secret mercantile credit account into my attorney's holding account. You prick! That's my money! You can't have it! Emily sputtered, her face turning crimson as a vein pulsed in her neck. Jimmy looked at her in surprise. It seemed he had no idea about her secret account. Gently, he pulled her back into her seat, still smirking. I think that moment put the first nail in the coffin of their relationship. If he hadn't cared so much for the kids, he might have walked out right then. Sit down and shut up, you cheating liar. The adults are talking, he snapped. Emily went silent, her face shifting from red to pale. As I was saying before I was rudely interrupted, I continued, since she earns significantly more than I do, she will also pay me $2,500 a month in spousal support, deposited into my attorney's account. As for the company you both work for, to compensate for destroying my marriage and for my injuries, you will pay me $10 million, net of taxes, into my attorney's account, along with covering all my medical expenses, legal fees, and aftercare costs. This must be paid by 5 p.m. this coming Friday. Jimmy started laughing uncontrollably. Are you insane? Why should we pay you everything we have? We're only here for 20%. Excuse me? I replied. Did you say 20%? Yes, 20%, he barked. I heard you, but do you know what that means? I asked calmly. Is this some number you pulled out of thin air to back up your nonsense? He challenged. No, I said. I did thorough research on your company's clients and revenue. Since your company is publicly traded, all this information is readily available online. It's completely legitimate. Now, think about how this will impact your father's congressional campaign. After all, he's running on a family values platform. Then consider your clientele. You have several high-profile entertainment and political clients. One hint of scandal, and they'll abandon you. Next, your advertising branch. You represent 2 children's clothing stores, a baby product company, and a sports goods manufacturer. Every well-known brand will drop you like a hot potato, and you'll be scapegoated at a board meeting when things hit the fan. So, you see, $10 million is actually quite reasonable. Jimmy looked unwell, no longer arrogant. My attorney will send the full amount. It should be in her account by Friday at 5 o'clock. No one had anything else to say, but I could see Jimmy still contemplating his escape. I continued, Oh, and Jimmy, if you think my disappearance will let you off the hook, I've sent the whole story to 5 out-of-state attorneys. If anything happens to me, they'll notify the media. His defeated expression told me I'd hit the mark. As we walked away, I called out, 5 p.m. Friday. Later, back in my room, Grace asked why I gave in and let Jimmy adopt my children. She glanced at the DNA test results I handed her and laughed. You clever prick. The kids aren't yours? I'm not sure yet. This shows she was cheating on both Jimmy and me. I intend to find out and make sure Jimmy knows. Dan, I'd hate to be on your bad side. You'd have made a great attorney. Thanks, but I don't have the eliminator instinct. You do, you just haven't used it. The doctor visited later, saying I could go home the next day if I had help. I stayed with Nick and Cam for a while, visiting the hospital twice a week to change my dressings and monitor my kidney's recovery. On Friday, I waited nervously for 5 p.m., but my attorney called at 3:30. The money was in the account, $10,861,312. Wow, I was rich. Grace paid her share and transferred the rest to my checking account. Life went on. After 8 weeks of care from friends, I returned home, but the house felt empty and depressing. I decided to move closer to my sister. At work, I called Greg and May into a meeting. I explained I needed a fresh start elsewhere, thanked them, and handed over ownership of the business, including all profits earned in my absence. Then, I took them out to dinner. Next, I treated Nick and Cam to dinner and gave them a check for $500,000 for taking care of me. They tried to refuse, but I insisted. It was Jimmy's employer's money, not mine. They finally accepted. Over a glass of wine, I told them I was moving to New York to be near my sister. Nick asked about my house, and I said I'd probably rent it out. He hesitated, so I urged him to speak up. He mentioned his son Eric, who had just graduated with an engineering degree, was getting married and needed a place to live. Would I rent the house to him? I agreed, telling Nick to set the rent based on what they could afford and use the money for a college fund for their baby. Cam hugged me so hard I thought she broke my ribs again. The next day, Nick cried. I called Patty to let her know I was coming to stay with her until I found a place. She was thrilled and began planning activities. 3 weeks later, I closed my front door for the last time, shed a few tears, and handed the keys to Nick. I also left Emily's car title for his son as a housewarming gift. We hugged and promised to stay in touch. After a leisurely 2-week road trip, I arrived at Patty's. She hugged me until I gasped for air. "We're going out to dinner with a friend. Just wear slacks and a shirt," she said. When we got there, Emily's sister Amy was waiting. We went to a casual diner with a bar, and I realized I'd been set up. I was annoyed at first, but I couldn't stay mad at Patty for long, so I decided to go with it. Ami hugged Patty as we reached the table, then, to my surprise, hugged me too, cursing Emily and wishing she'd rot in hell. Amy worked in accounting at an advertising company nearby. The evening went well, with Amy being the first to pull me onto the dance floor. We danced 2 waltzes and a slow song, then returned to Patty, who said, "You two look like a perfect couple." Ami blushed, and I quickly headed to the restroom. The rest of the evening, I danced with both Amy and Patty, avoiding the slow songs. At the end of the night, we put Amy in a cab and called one for ourselves. Patty just laughed and went to bed when we got home, ignoring my complaints about setting me up. The next day, we went house hunting. I preferred a house over an apartment, imagining barbecues and having friends over. Despite the high prices, thanks to being near New York City, I decided to buy with cash. After weeks of searching, I found a 3-bedroom home with separate living, kitchen, and dining areas, a decent yard, and a secure community entrance guarded 24/7. Patty loved it and joked about moving in with me. I had to furnish the house, buying all the essentials like towels, pots, and pans. Luckily, it came with kitchen appliances, but I still had to stock up on food and basics. Ami and Patty were invaluable in helping me, giving the place a homey touch rather than a man cave look. I set up one area as my workspace, complete with a custom motherboard, a top-of-the-line computer, and a fire-resistant safe. Patty and Amy insisted on a housewarming party, inviting their friends since I knew no one around. The plan worked. Soon I was on multiple social media and contact lists. For the next 3 weeks, weekends were filled with parties and barbecues. I barely thought of Emily and enjoyed my new social life. Ami and I grew closer during this time, more than friends, but not quite lovers. One evening, Patty and Amy planned to go to the theater, but Patty canceled last minute, leaving just Amy and me. During the taming of the shrew, Amy reached over and grabbed my hand. This was a surprise since the most we'd done before was a cheek kiss. After the play, we took a taxi to Amy's apartment, but it left before I could head home. I cursed, realizing there wouldn't be another cab this far out of town. Laughing, Amy said, "Then you'd better stay the night." She kissed me deeply, leading me inside. As we got to her bedroom, she asked, "What does a girl have to do to get you to sleep with her?" I figured it was time I made the first move. It was the best night of my life. "Now let me return the favor," I said, to which she replied, "What did you do to me? I've never felt this way before." At 1 p.m., we woke up starving and went to a neighborhood deli for lunch. Back at Ami's place, we talked about what had happened. She confessed she had liked me since we first met and, after my split with Emily, had turned to Patty for help in getting us together. I admitted I was interested in her too, but thought it would be inappropriate to approach my ex-wife's sister. Ami said she appreciated my consideration but had run out of patience, so she and Patty planned the previous night. Then, with a laugh, she texted Patty, "Mission accomplished." Amy drove me home to change. Unlike her sister, Amy didn't pick fights over little things, which made me feel at ease. Patty noticed this and often commented on how happy she was for us. We just seemed to fit. During this time, I was working on my project, which I finally completed. The beauty of these programs and hardware was their versatility. They could be adapted for military, gaming, aviation, and automotive applications. Knowing that thorough testing by gamers would reveal any flaws, I decided to reach out to a top game developer. When I approached the gaming company, they were skeptical, believing they already had the best programmers. After some negotiation, they agreed to a 3-month trial. I provided sealed units and tamper-proof software. After the trial, they called a meeting. I brought my sister, a corporate attorney, and one of her colleagues experienced in such negotiations, knowing the patents could be sold for much more in global sales. The company offered $120 million for the patents. However, I insisted on licensing rights for 10 years instead. My goal was $50 million plus a 1% royalty on all applications using my hardware and software for the same period. After hours of negotiation, we settled on $65 million and a 5% royalty for 10 years. Contracts were signed, and a handshake sealed the deal. I was suddenly very wealthy, even after taxes. Similar negotiations followed with the military's aeronautical department, a top aircraft supplier, and a major automaker. My post-tax cash assets were valued at over $250 million, with a 10-year potential worth more than $3.5 billion. Unsure of what to do with such wealth, I sought investment advice, knowing even basic interest would earn me over $12 million annually before taxes. My sister was renting her apartment, dating another attorney, and Amy and I had moved in together. Things were getting serious. A year had passed since I started my new life, and I decided it was time for some payback against those who had hurt me. I sat down with Amy and said, "I still want to get back at your sister. Are you okay with that?" She replied, "Burn the witch. I'll help if you need it." We discussed various plans, but decided to wait before taking action. Just after dinner, the phone rang. An assistant DA from Freestone, Texas, asked if I would testify in 3 weeks. They had caught the people who attacked me. I agreed, and Amy insisted on coming with me. We decided to make a quick trip, arriving a week before the trial. We flew to Texas, where Nick picked us up and dropped us off at our motel. As a thank you, we took Nick and Cam to dinner at the Regency Club. The women looked stunning in cocktail dresses, while I wore a $2,000 Italian suit, and Nick donned his best church outfit. None of us had been to this restaurant before, so it was a special night. A uniformed doorman opened the car doors, then the restaurant door. The head waiter guided us to our table as Cam and Nick admired the pianist playing soft music. We enjoyed a light appetizer of thinly sliced melon and Parma ham, followed by our choice of entrees and fruit salad, accompanied by red and dessert wines. While savoring the wine, I noticed Emily and her husband, Jimmy, seated nearby with another couple. Ami excused herself to use the powder room, with Cam following. They had to pass by Emily's table. I watched as Emily froze, covering her mouth in shock. Amy greeted her, pointed to me, and said something that made Cam laugh. Emily rushed out of the restaurant with Jimmy in tow. When Amy and Cam returned, I asked what Amy had said. Amy explained, "After Cam said hi, Emily asked who I was with. I replied, 'I'm with another millionaire sitting over there. Thanks for divorcing him. We were meant to be together. You obviously traded down.' Then I added, 'I don't see what you ever saw in that stuffed monkey,' and walked away." We danced and laughed about Ami's encounter late into the night. The next day, while Nick and Cam worked, Amy and I played tourists, even spending a day at a weapon range where Amy proved to be a surprisingly good shot. The day before the trial, we had dinner at Nick and Cam's house. Home-cooked food tasted so much better than restaurant fare. We toasted their upcoming wedding, and Nick shared that his son was getting married in the spring. When we met with the assistant DA, he called the case a slam dunk. My providing the DNA of the trio's leader had helped identify him. He was prepared to testify against his accomplices. The trial concluded with the leader receiving a 15-year sentence in exchange for testifying. The one I struck in the throat got 2 years since he didn't actively participate in the attack, while the other received 5 years for his first offense. After Nick and Cam dropped us off at the airport, I handed Nick an envelope and told him not to open it until after we had taken off. Inside were the deeds to my old house, a wedding gift for his son. I had shown it only to his son, understanding the importance of wedding vows. After settling in at home, I called my sister, inviting her and her partner to dinner on Friday without telling Ami. When Friday arrived, I finally let Ami in on the dinner plans, and she was thrilled. That evening, we took a limo to a restaurant I had booked 3 weeks in advance. After a hearty meal, a man in a gypsy costume approached our table and played a love ballad on his violin. Then, to Amy's surprise, he got down on one knee and proposed to her. Through tears of joy and applause from the whole restaurant, she said yes. Her expression was priceless. My sister walked over, hugged Amy, and said, "Welcome to the family." We danced for the rest of the evening before the limo took us home. Our wedding was set for early spring, and invitations went out. I stayed out of the planning, leaving it to Amy and my sister. The ceremony took place at a nearby church, and I covered lodging for all out-of-town guests, reserving a full floor at the Hilton for their 3-day stay. The wedding was a grand event, and everyone had a fantastic time. Nick and Cam said they hadn't had so much fun in years. They invited us to their son's wedding, planned for 2 months later, complete with daily excursions and evening dances. Ami and I spent 2 weeks sailing the Caribbean. We needed another break after our wedding and returned completely exhausted. By then, I had a troubleshooting team in place to handle any issues with my program and hardware, allowing me to take things slow while planning my next steps for retribution. 9 months later, our son James was born, followed by his sister Sarah a year later. We moved into a larger house, but stayed within our safe community. By this point, I was quite wealthy and even became somewhat of a celebrity, frequently attending charitable events. Some society magazines began calling Ami and me the ideal couple. However, I never let go of my desire for revenge. The pain of what had been done to me lingered. Over the past 5 years, I had hired a PI to gather information on Emily, Jimmy, and everyone connected to them, including her former boss, Troy Simmons. I wanted to know if Troy was the father of Emily's twins. The PI confirmed my suspicions. The twins were Troy's. Additionally, Emily was still seeing Troy and 2 other men, while Jimmy was occupied with his father's business and a string of escorts. The first phase of my plan began with a revelation. I sent Jimmy the twins' DNA results along with Troy's, adding a note that read, "Do the math." This confirmed the twins were not his and revealed Emily's ongoing affairs. I also included evidence of her current infidelities, then stepped back to let the chaos unfold. 2 months later, Nick called to inform me that Jimmy had kicked Emily out, using their prenup to keep the kids he had adopted. She was left with nothing, and no one knew where she had gone. Ami called Emily's parents to see if they had any information, but her father replied, "Don't contact us again," and mentioned he had only wired her a couple of $1,000s. Emily was now feeling the sting of betrayal and loss. Phase 1 was complete. Her email account was still active, so I sent her the PI's report on Jimmy, including photos of him with various women. I thought, this should stir things up. A few days later, as Ami and I watched an old movie, the security gate's intercom chimed. "Miss Prescott wants to visit," I told Amy. "Shall we let her in?" Amy shrugged. "Let's hear what she has to say." I instructed the guard to let her in. A short while later, there was a knock at the door. When Amy opened it, Emily stood there looking disheveled, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, no makeup. Amy gestured for her to come inside, and as she walked in, I noticed she avoided making eye contact with me. Ami handed her a cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully before sitting down. Though part of me felt pity, I also recalled the pain she had caused. "You look like a wreck. What happened to you?" I asked. Emily broke down, unable to speak for 10 minutes. Then, through tears, she explained, "He found out I was seeing Troy all along. He figured out the twins weren't his. Then, after our marriage, he discovered I was still seeing Troy. He went wild and threw me out in the clothes I was wearing. I checked into a motel. I had my laptop in my car and a couple thousand in my account. No one would speak to me after what I did to you. My family disowned me." She glanced up, eyes red and puffy. I called his father Barry, who told me he didn't need me anymore since he now had an heir to the family fortune. My dad finally agreed to talk to me, wired me a few thousand, and told me never to call again. She looked at Amy, adding, "I had nowhere else to go, so I came here hoping you might pity me." "I didn't expect any help from you." She nodded at me. "I know you wouldn't piss on me if I were on fire. I'm sorry for everything. I was cruel and selfish and deserved this, but I miss my children. I was a terrible wife, but I was a good mother." She paused, looking defeated, and stopped her rehearsed speech. While I knew she had practiced it, most of what she said was true. I felt some pity for her, but I still wanted to deal with Jimmy, though that could wait. He had caused me suffering, and his time was coming. Emily mentioned she hadn't eaten in 2 days. When Amy asked if she was hungry, Emily nodded. Amy made bacon, eggs, hash browns, and pancakes. Emily asked for more coffee, which Amy provided, and she quickly devoured the meal. Afterward, Ami showed her to the guest bedroom and left some clothes on the bed for her. While Emily showered, Amy and I discussed our next steps. "As much as I hate her, she's still my sister. We should help," Amy admitted. I agreed, partly to annoy Jimmy by showing her recovery. For now, we decided to let her stay in the guest room until we found other options. "I'll take her shopping for basics tomorrow," Amy said. Emily came back downstairs looking more rested. We told her the plan for the next few days, and she started crying again. Later, we all went to bed. The next morning, Emily prepared breakfast, coffee, and buttered toast. I joined Amy at the table. "Dan, I'm so lucky. I didn't expect this kindness," Emily said. "You took my family from me," I replied. "What you did was unforgivable, but with Amy's love, I can finally forgive you. I won't dwell on it anymore. No more apologies. This chapter ends here." I added, "You're going shopping with Amy today, but just to Walmart." She nodded. Later that day, I looked for housing options for Emily. Fortunately, a one-bedroom house 2 streets away was available. It was move-in ready, fully equipped, and the owner was posted overseas for 3 years. After inspecting it, I paid a year's rent and a security deposit. When the girls returned from shopping, I shared the news. Emily hugged me, thanking me through tears. Ami grinned and blew a kiss. Emily turned to me and whispered, "I don't know what I was thinking when I messed up our marriage. I should never have let you go. Ami, take good care of him. He's the best man you'll ever find." Then she hurried upstairs, hiding her emotions. Alone with Amy, I explained my plans to help Emily and take down Jimmy and his father. We loaded Amy's van and arranged for the rest to be delivered the next day. As Emily shopped for essentials, the girls found a place for everything in the new house. It was like magic, fitting it all in. We chose to support Emily financially, giving her a credit card with a $1,000 monthly limit and $10,000 for her checking account. More hugs and tears followed. That night in bed, Amy said, "I'm glad you didn't kick Emily when she was down." I replied that I hoped she learned her lesson and would treat her next partner better. The next day, we helped Emily settle into her new house, though she insisted on doing most of the work herself. She even invited us over for dinner that night. We left the kids with a sitter and headed over. Emily prepared a delicious meal: roast beef, baked potatoes, mixed veggies with garlic butter and honey, and for dessert, baked apples stuffed with raisins and topped with ice cream. We left completely full. Emily adjusted well, and in the following weeks, Amy and I agreed to help with her divorce. I arranged a meeting with an attorney. At Patty's recommendation, we met with Brian Scott. Although he didn't approve of Emily's past actions, he agreed to take on the case. Our main goal was getting her children back. Money was secondary. "I have an idea," I said during the meeting. I allowed Jimmy to adopt the kids. When Brian mentioned this would be a challenge, I asked, "What if the children aren't biologically mine?" I explained that I had received $2 million for the kids, but refused, letting Jimmy adopt them without financial gain. However, I was considering seeking $10 million for alienation of affection against Jimmy and XYZ advertising. I had signed a non-disclosure agreement with them to keep XYZ out of the divorce proceedings. If I violated it, I'd have to repay the money. I gave Brian the DNA reports proving that Troy Simmons was the father, showing that the children weren't mine. Therefore, Jimmy had no claim and the adoption was unofficial. This meant Emily could reclaim them. I clarified, this isn't just for Emily, it's to mess with Jimmy and his father. Brian nodded. "Leave it to me and I'll get back to you." That evening, I told Amy what I had done, and she fully supported it. We then invited Emily over. She seemed nervous at first until I explained my plan. Grateful, she threw her arms around me, then quickly pulled back, embarrassed and apologizing. "Don't worry about it," Amy and I said in unison. "Let's leave it at that." A few days later, Brian contacted us and requested a meeting with Emily and me. He would now be representing her instead of me. During the meeting, he laid out his plan. "First," he began, "we'll file a motion to annul the adoption." He paused, looking at us before continuing. "Second, I'll report to the state that Jimmy Prescott and his father, Barry, attempted to purchase children, violating the Anti-Slavery Act of 1865. He let that sink in. "Third, we'll pursue charges for this offense. They coerced Mr. Dan Colton into allowing the adoption. Since the children weren't his biologically, the adoption is void." He showed us the DNA results to prove this. Emily will demand the return of her children, currently being kept at 218. Fifth, we'll sue Mr. Troy Simmons for sexual maltreatment as he forced the then Mrs. Colton into an affair to keep her job. Sixth, we'll pursue legal action against Jimmy Prescott for coercing Emily into a relationship that destroyed her marriage. He continued. Seventh, we'll file a lawsuit against XYZ Advertising for enabling the maltreatment and promoting the affair. Both CEO Jimmy Prescott and Chairman Barry Prescott knew about the affair and supported it, causing the marriage breakdown. Eighth, we'll charge Troy Simmons with alienation of affection, contributing to the end of Emily's marriage. Ninth, we'll charge Jimmy Prescott for the same reason. 10th, we'll go after XYZ Advertising for failing to include a morality clause in staff contracts despite knowing about the affair. And lastly, 11th, we'll sue XYZ for supporting the affair between Jimmy and Mrs. Colton, which led to the marriage's dissolution. Brian then looked at me and added, "Finally, Mr. Colton acknowledges he signed an NDA for $10 million and is prepared to repay the amount if he breaks the agreement." We stood there, stunned by Brian's comprehensive plan. Emily, though shaken, seemed ready. "I'll handle the fallout," she said. I brought this on myself. Move now, I told Brian, and XYZ will face a media attack targeting Troy Simmons, Jimmy Prescott, Barry Prescott, and the company. Brian nodded, saying he'd be ready in 2 weeks. I was to launch my attack a week later. Leaving Brian's office, I felt justice was within reach. Though Jimmy and Barry put up a legal fight, Brian pressed on. A week later, as planned, I sent all the gathered evidence to every media outlet. The media pounced, camping outside the courthouse and homes of those involved. As expected, XYZ's clients began threatening to cut ties. The board fired Troy Simmons without severance, and to stop the bleeding, Jimmy and Barry Prescott stepped down. XYZ also paid Emily a 7-figure settlement. With my own compensation, I would easily cover the $10 million NDA repayment. The fallout continued. Congressman Barry Prescott, known for his family values campaign, resigned, citing illness. Soon after, the FBI found financial anomalies, including payments to escorts and misuse of campaign funds. He was called before a select committee. Less than a month later, Emily regained custody of her children. Shortly after, Amy and I drove Emily and the kids to her parents' house for a reconciliation. I told her parents, I've forgiven her. While we may not be close friends, we're at least civil. I hope you can forgive her too. Seeing their grandchildren for the first time helped smooth things over. In the aftermath, Barry Prescott was sentenced to 3 years for campaign fund misuse. Jimmy was found guilty of attempted human trafficking and embezzling company funds, receiving a 5-year sentence. His sentence was longer because he refused to reveal where some of the missing money came from, money I had set him up to take. For my final revenge, I bribed the prison allocator to place Jimmy with a particularly dangerous inmate. Meanwhile, Emily moved into a larger home, retook her bar exams, and started working at the same law firm as Patty. Though we didn't socialize much, we occasionally babysat for each other. Emily hasn't dated since. She's focused on her career and children.